Good afternoon, and welcome to meeting 4 of the Community Safety Advisory Commission. I'm going to wait just a little bit before we do introductions. I have decided that every meeting we will go around and introduce, and especially since we're now being recorded, but I'm expecting several more commission members, so we'll do that just a little bit later. But I do think I have enough members to have approval of the minutes. May I get a motion for approval of the minutes? So move. Second. Second. Any questions or concerns? All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? The minutes pass. Brian, I think you're up next on giving us a little bit of an update on the RFP.
Thank you. One quick note on the minutes. We received an email from Emily noting that she was incorrectly noted as absent, so we can correct that and make sure that that's in the official minutes. On the safety RFP update, so I think we shared at the last meeting that we had 7 bidders that provided responses to the RFP for the safety process there. For this operations review, we have a 5-member evaluation committee, which we also shared with you last week. That's myself, Elon, George, Chair Jackson, and then Carla Williams Scott, who's the director of the Department of Neighborhoods. We've had 1 meeting of that evaluation committee, have picked 3 vendors that we'll be inviting in to present to the evaluation committee. We are working through currently with the city attorney's office to find the best way to present this information to the commission without violating the confidentiality of the process. So I think at the next meeting we'll have even more information about that process. Currently we are hoping to enter into negotiations at some point in July, have that negotiations complete, all of the relevant documents signed mid to late July.
Thank you, Brian. You received an email from Brian, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but talking about this meeting, and you can see how we've adjusted the agenda a little bit. So just to remind you, we're going to have these informational sessions that are mostly presentations and then the discussions to follow. So please, as we, for example, have this first one on the civil service process for hiring, if you have questions, jot them down. Then we'll take a break, and then we have a time for Q&A. I need to, I don't know if it's to apologize, but I did not follow certain rules that we have at our last meeting, and I've been reminded of that. We absolutely encourage members of the public to come and to sit and to observe, but it is the law in both the state and local laws, as well as our own bylaws, that the audience cannot participate in the sessions with us unless, if at some point we want to do that, there has to be public notice of that. But that's not going to be a part of what we do on a regular basis going forward. So again, I'm sorry I didn't announce it at the last meeting, but that will be our process going into the future. We're going to start out today by having just kind of a group discussion reflecting on our last meeting. I think that's something else that I've been hearing, that sometimes the commissioners aren't able to share their own learnings or their own thoughts. And of course, the last one was on the legal advisor presentation, Mr. Furby. And it did go quite a bit longer than we thought because the commissioners were so engaged in the Q&A. So we're going to do that, but I'm going to jump down in the agenda, and I don't want you to be thinking about this too much today. But if you look at the 6:30 time period, group report out, 1 big takeaway, I'm going to ask each commissioner at that point, in just about a minute per person, so far what has been your biggest takeaway about what we're doing, the process or anything about it. It's just something coming personally from you. So I didn't want to throw that out there at 6:15 when you're going to be a little tired probably anyway, but you can just put that in the back of your mind to think about that we are going to do it. And so now the floor is open for any discussion on the legal advisor's presentation. None?
Discussion, but one of the pieces that I did have a note of that I wanted to ask about at a future time, and I don't know if this one is appropriate, but one of the things that we've been covering over the course of the presentations, I think the legal one is an example of that as well, is that we've been getting some dispelling of the myths in terms of the process from the legal side of it. And what I was wondering is, will we be able to have an opportunity to hear the myths from the other side, how those myths impact and how they were created? Because what's true about certain myths is that they're true for somebody. And I wonder if we are going to hear from the voices who those myths are true for. And how do we go engage in dialogue around the misnomers of what police work is?
So are you basically talking about public sessions or forums where we invite, in essence, the public in to share?
Well, at some point, is there going to be any dialogue in regard to even us representing what we've been hearing from the side of the, because right now we've been receiving a lot of content, and I think that's an appropriate step of it. But at some point, I wonder if we'll pivot a bit where those same presenters will come back and hear from us on the topics and from our perspective and how those myths are generated, I think.
I don't know if we're anticipating very specific presenters coming back. Many of them are with us all the time. For example, Jeff's going to be at all of the meetings. I don't know if there'll be this session we're just sharing with them what we sort of think, or again, the myths. But again, I'm envisioning that when the consultants are on board, this is when I see this greater dialogue, including, call them focus groups, going into the community, surveys, things of that nature. Am I answering your question? Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
But one of the things we do need, and I hope that everyone, it was given to you at our very first meeting, and it's this single page that has only 7 numbers. I would ask you just to take a look at it, because sometimes we're trying to bring things up in sessions sooner than they should be. So for example, use of force is a big one. And you can see that under number 4, that's when we get into a much deeper, yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you help us to understand I don't think this
The document?
What document are you
Yes,
referring
it's
to?
one page,
And what's
I
the
believe it
title?
was given out at our very first meeting. It has the topics that we're going to be covering. And it's numbered 1 through 7. But for example, we have actually in our first 3 meetings only covered A, B, and C under 1. We are just getting to 2. So I just want you to review it, and if you don't have it, let's please make sure maybe that it gets sent out again to the commissioners, because if you see that we're going to cover the topic in the future, we really would like you to hold off to go deep dive on those questions until we get to that specific subject.
So my question, and it's kind of a statement as well. Mr. Furby's presentation, I found it very interesting and very informative. But my question becomes, can we have a discussion about introducing this information into the lives of our students, maybe in the high schools or the junior high schools, because especially in Columbus Public, where this information will be immensely valuable to young people to know, how they can engage and what the implications of their actions may be. Government is taught in school, but I don't know that it is as relevant, immediately relevant, as this information would be were we able to begin to introduce it into our school system.
Remember, at the end of our process, it is our responsibility to make recommendations to the mayor. And so again, I would just say, as you're thinking about those types of things, please make a note, because this is going to be a long process. So when we get to that, hold on to that. You've got it written down. We can bring it up and discuss it in some way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I wanted to just kind of bring it up in this space, just because I see Mr. Furby there, and so I know that would involve his office and maybe even him personally in order to put something like that together. So just planting that seed.
To the schools, both in terms of presenting the ABCs, not only in our high schools, but also in the middle schools, as well as our school resource officers. So we'll be covering that in depth.
Anything else about Jeff's presentation?
So I'm looking at the document you were referring to, Chairwoman, and up until this meeting today, there has been 3 presentations that each person that presented started out presenting from we're here to have an open discussion and a conversation. And so I would love some more clarity around what that looks like for these presenters, because it appears to me that as we, and I can't speak for my other commissioners, as we have questions and want to begin dialogue, there is nothing that I've been able to see in writing that speaks to what that looks like. So if you could give us more clarity around as we prepare to go into this meeting, and we will be presented with information, and all 3 sessions have been basically, from my perspective, a lecture and a lecture and a lecture, and not a lot of time for us to weigh in. And so can you talk about what the questions, as those each time people are saying, ask questions, what do they want to see so that we know how to move forward?
I hope I understand what you're saying. What we're going to try to do is to have the participants, the speakers, share the information. Because one of the things, quite frankly, that is happening, if we start just peppering them with questions, we are not going to get through the materials. So I'm asking you to hold your questions, jot them down, and then when those speakers are there, then we will have the opportunity to ask them questions. And as your chair, that's a part of my role. You know, we start on time, we try to end on time. This is a lot of information. We absolutely want dialogue, but when is the dialogue appropriate? And we think it is after the presentations. So a little bit more structure today than the last one. Okay? Yes.
Is it still fair as we go through, just to make sure we're clarifying it now, acronyms or charts of location,
Yes.
just go through for clarifying
Yes.
questions? No,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Always. Well, Jeff, again, evidently you were very thorough the last time we met. I thought from someone who used to be in the city attorney, or be the city attorney, having that person work for me, that you did a great job in clarifying your role. You are that sort of independent person in all of this, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. It was a learning experience for me, to be perfectly honest.
Good. So we are actually going to be a little bit ahead. We're going to go into the informational session on civil service process for hiring, and Amy DeLong is going to be first up. I hate to do this, but commission members who said, is it okay if they stay where they are, or do we need to have them move? Or all of the speakers here? Okay, good, good.
First and foremost, I want to make sure everybody has this folder, because it will have all of the information we're going to cover, as well as a PowerPoint, so that you can follow through and take notes right on the side of the PowerPoint. As Ms. Jackson said, I'm Amy DeLong, and I'm the director of the Civil Service Commission, and my staff and I are going to explain the civil services role in hiring of a police officer. We have 2 main roles. We have the testing, and we have compliance, so we're involved throughout the entire process. So I want to make sure I give you a quick roadmap about what we're going to talk about today before we pepper you with just lots of information. What I'm going to do here shortly is show you a quick video so you understand what civil service is. I think there's a lot of ideas about what we do and what we don't do, and I think that video will give you just a quick understanding. I'll talk a little bit about the charter and the rules that we follow in terms of the testing and hiring process, and then I'm going to share some candidate data with you. Outside of that, I'm going to end up having my uniform testing manager, Liz Reed, talk to you about the application process, clear through the testing process from start to finish. And it's a lot of data. So just be prepared that we're going to pepper you with lots of information. And again, I tried to put the lines there so you could actually write the questions by the slide, so that we can, at the end, you can go back to that slide if there's specific information on that slide that we may not have addressed in a way that's understandable. And last but not least, I'll have Brenda Sobiak, my manager over uniform certification, go over the certification process and background standards. Like I said, you have the full folder, I can't speak today, full folder of information. And basically what I'm going to do, if you just keep it all intact, I'm going to hold it up as each of us talks so you know what document we're on, so that you can kind of follow through with us, because sometimes I know when you get a folder like that, it's ridiculous trying to figure out what piece of document you should be looking at. Outside of that, I want to show you a quick video that he's going to have to help me out with here. It's important that you understand our role and the significance of the charter and the hiring of a police officer, and this will tell you a little bit about that.
No matter who you are, no matter where you live in the city, you want the very best for your family, your friends, and your neighbors. The best police protection, the cleanest water, the fastest response in case of a fire, the most timely refuse removal, the earliest and most complete snow removal. And who is it that provides these services? People, very capable people, the employees of the City of Columbus. It's the role of the Columbus Civil Service Commission to find the most capable people for jobs like these all over the city, and we give you our very best every day. The City of Columbus currently employs thousands of people. These government employees work throughout the city in the departments of public safety, health, public utilities, public service, development, recreation and parks, finance and management, and building and zoning, as well as in the offices of elected and appointed city officials. These departments rely on the Civil Service Commission to provide the best employees for the city. The Commission strives to screen for the most qualified candidates so that our local government can be as efficient and effective as possible. But this wasn't always the case. There was no civil service in the early 1900s, so the people in charge could hire whomever they wanted to hire. There were two major problems with the system of the old days. First, politicians would divvy up government jobs among their friends, relatives, and political allies, often without considering if they had the training, experience, or education to do the job. Second, whenever new politicians were elected, there was often a large-scale turnover of employees, resulting in a lack of continuity that delayed city projects and disrupted local services. This system created a standard of poor quality services delivered to the public and poor value for its tax dollars, spoiling the people's trust in the local government. The solution came shortly after the turn of the century, when all across the country, civil service commissions were created to provide appropriate checks and balances for local governments that previously had had no accountability. In 1914, the citizens of Columbus adopted the city charter, which formally established our Civil Service Commission. The design of the new system was simple. Elected officials retained some of their authority for hiring and firing city employees, but the Civil Service Commission was now in place to ensure that the city maintained a competent workforce capable of delivering quality services to the public. Under our charter system, prospective employees hired by the city are required to demonstrate that they are capable of performing the important functions of the job, either by taking a test or by the Commission's review of their qualifications. This approach helps to ensure fair and consistent hiring practices when filling city jobs. Testing and job security became the checks on the hiring and firing practices of local politicians. The Commission's responsibility is still to ensure that all city departments are staffed with the best qualified employees. We do so by approving and rejecting employment applications, creating and administering tests, hearing appeals of employee disciplinary actions, maintaining the city's official personnel records, and verifying that employees are properly classified. Testing remains a top priority of the Commission. We accomplished this objective through a wide variety of testing methods, such as written examinations, oral evaluations, physical capabilities tests, equipment operation, and computer tests. When the testing is complete, the Civil Service Commission places those candidates who passed on an eligible list. The city departments then use the list of eligible candidates when they fill a vacancy, and they know they can fill it with the very best available applicant. We are the Columbus Civil Service Commission. Make
Which is introduce ourselves. We certainly want our guests to know who we are. So I'm going to ask the first commissioner to introduce herself. And we're going to do this at every meeting. We'll try to do it at the very beginning, but I just think it's something that's important to do.
Ellen Moore Griffin, Director of Community Crime Patrol.
Tammy Fournier Alsada, lead organizer of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and the People's Justice Project.
Dr. Chanel Jones, lead faculty at Franklin University over Criminal Justice Administration, Public Safety and Emergency Management and Homeland Security.
Emily Buster, Development Officer, ETSS.
Andrea Morbitzer, Risk Manager of Community Employee Safety, Nationwide Children's Hospital.
LaShawn Carter, Franklin County Children's Services.
Erin Sink, Director of Government Affairs for L&E Group. I'm also Vice Chair of the Southside Area Commission, and in that capacity, I would like to welcome you here to the Southside today.
Tiffany White, North Central Area Commission Chair, and also a part of Minority Recruiting for Police and Fire.
Brooke Burns, Chief Counsel of the Juvenile Unit, Office of the Ohio Public Defender.
Janet Jackson, the chair.
Matthew McChrystal, City of Columbus resident, public safety professional.
Oletha Wall, Director at the Columbus Urban League.
Tracy Shaw, Fraternal Order of Police.
I'm not a commissioner, but I'll introduce myself. I'm Ned Pettis, the Director of Public Safety for the City of Columbus.
George Speaks, I'm Ned's Deputy Director.
Brian Clark, Chief Policy Advisor to Mayor Ginther.
Yvonne Sims, Director of Community Affairs for Mayor Ginther.
Denise Bauer, Mayor's Office.
Since we had so many folks over there today, and go back to our presentation. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. I hope the video kind of gave you an understanding of kind of the overall role that we play in the hiring. The important thing that I wanted you all to take from that is we operate under a charter that was created back in 1914. It's been amended through a charter committee several times. We'll talk about some of those amendments later on in the process, but I wanted you to have a copy of it. So the second document you'll find in your packet is our charter rules for civil service, and I've actually highlighted those areas that pertain to the hiring of police officers. And this charter lays out the grounds for us hiring every position within the city. So changes that we make to the charter, if you guys make that recommendation, would be something we would have to look at, whether we're changing it for the whole city or more narrowly. I guess the scope of it's a little more narrow. When we look throughout the process, there's 3 rules there. The first one I want you to look at is 149, and that basically is the rules that we operate by. In 150, that talks specifically about examinations, and then in 151, it talks about the appointment process. I won't bore you through all of that, but I wanted you to have it because it's an important part of how we operate and do business at the civil service, because that's what we follow in order to do our job. Now that you know a little bit about civil service and a little bit about our charter, I'm going to have Liz, who is the manager over our testing process for safety forces, which would be both police and fire, take you through from start to finish the whole hiring process for the police officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. So,
it's right there.
Oh, there we go. So the first thing we do when we're getting ready to create any kind of examination or selection process for any of the jobs within the city of Columbus, we do what's called a job analysis, or really just a study of the job itself. So we did that with police officer. We certainly have updated that through time. Through that job analysis, there were 4 general areas that were considered to be very important to the overall success of someone coming in as a police officer. They were the cognitive skills such as reading comprehension, writing skills, interpersonal relations and problem solving, and physical abilities. So those are the 4 grouped together most basic areas of opportunity, or areas that we want to make sure that we're testing when candidates are coming through the process. But before I get into the actual testing piece, I want to share with you the entire selection process. The first part of the process, what I consider to be the most important part, is making the decision Because once you make the decision to become a police officer or a firefighter or whatever that job is that you're looking for, it's going to help carry you through all the way through the rest of the steps. So the very first step starts with the candidate or the applicant. Once that happens, candidates will file applications. They'll file those applications during the regular filing periods or during recruiting events when we can have that open for just those targeted recruiting events. The next thing, once the application is filed, we're going to review those for minimum qualifications and what we call an abbreviated background questionnaire. I'm not going to talk about the background questionnaire, that'll be handled a little bit later, but with the minimum qualifications, there are really only 4 minimum qualifications in order to test for a police officer. The first one is you have to be at least 20 years of age. You have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to have a high school diploma or equivalent to that. And finally, a driver's license. So those are the 4 requirements in order to be able to sit for the exam. There are some background questions, but we'll cover that in a little bit. So once that happens, we'll invite all of those individuals to self-schedule themselves for an exam date, and they'll come and they'll take the examination. The examination is a 4-part exam. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Once they've completed the examination process, and if they're successful in that process, they'll be placed on what's called an eligible list. At that point, that's when police take over, so to speak, because they start the beginning of the background process. So there's a background investigation, there's the safety director review. It is the public safety director that actually is the appointing authority for these positions, who will make the offers. And they give what's called a conditional offer of employment at that point. Once a conditional offer is made, then there is a post-offer medical and psychological examination, and there's also a state-required physical examination that they must take. Finally, they go into the academy, and yes, I consider that part of the selection process because they also have to be successful in that process. And actually, to be a law enforcement officer, there's a state exam that's done at the very end of the process. They have to pass that in order to be a sworn member on the police force. And then finally, field training. So in field training, what the applicants, or actually at this point, what the police officers do is they're going to be teamed up with various police officers who have time, and they're going to be evaluated on a very regular basis to ensure that they're able to fulfill the competencies of the job.
Officers training council? Okay, thank you.
Got that? Okay.
Commission?
Can you jot the questions down? Because I may cover some of the questions that you have through the presentation, but please write it down next to the slide and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. So with the police officer examination, we do have quite a few sources of information for anyone who is interested in becoming a police officer. The first thing is we send notices to candidates. So anytime a person who is in the process, they're going to get a notice, even if they're rejected in the process. For example, they're not 20 years of age at the time of application. We'll send them a notice. Maybe they marked the wrong question, or maybe they're actually older. They can then verify that, let us know that they are old enough, and they have a chance to get back in the process. So we do send notices to all candidates or potential applicants. We have our civil service website. We have a ton of information on there, including, I'm going to cover that in a minute, but there's a lot of information available there. We conduct what's called information sessions. So these are sessions that we'll hold just prior to the examination, where candidates can come and they can learn about the entire selection process. Our goal, or what we really want to accomplish, is for candidates not to be surprised by the testing process, for them to have all the information they need to be able to perform at their best. So we offer all of this information, and then we always have contact information. We have a dedicated phone line, we have a dedicated email line, so if anyone has any questions along the way, they can always contact us and we'll give a very prompt response. So this is what the web page looks like that's dedicated for police officer. On the website, we have what's called the selection process. It really covers everything that I just explained to you, but in a lot more detail on a 2-page handout. But if you hit that link, you'll get this page, so they can see that there's a lot of steps in the process, and they won't be thrown off guard by that. The next thing we provide is a study guide. In your packet, you have an example of a police officer study guide. We also provide sample videos. This examination has 4 components to it that really focus on those 4 competencies that I talked about earlier. So one of those is a writing sample. We give them a sample video so they can actually practice responding to that. In addition, we provide a sample, what's called a COPE video. COPE stands for Columbus. Columbus Oral Police Exam. Thank you. Columbus Oral Police Examination. So what we do in that exam is we have video scenarios that are developed, and then candidates will respond to that verbally. We record those responses and we grade those at a later date. Because that's an unusual type of testing method, we do provide a sample video, and a sample response. And then there's a lot of other information that people may be interested in. We have the physical test video. For the physical test, there are push-ups, sit-ups, and a 300-meter run. Our definition of what a sit-up is may not be the same as your definition of a sit-up, so we show a video and show exactly what those expectations are so that they come in on test day, they're doing those sit-ups, and each one of those sit-ups would count. So to start off any testing process, we will first begin accepting applications. Our application this year time period is July. The entire month of July is open for applications. I encourage you, if you know anyone who's interested in becoming a police officer, to apply during that time, and you do that right on our website at columbus.gov/civil service. As I mentioned earlier, we do have information sessions. Those dates are already available to the public. So we have that on our website now. These are the current dates. So if people want to learn a little bit more about the police officer exam, there's no need to register. We welcome anyone that would like to attend. So just to give you a little bit more about the testing phases, we have a 4-phase examination. The first phase is a multiple choice exam. If you want, in the study guide, you'll see all the different components that are included in that multiple choice exam. We also have samples regarding the writing sample. So the multiple choice exam, I'm going to go back a little bit. The multiple choice exam is going to cover 5 different areas: spelling, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and map reading. So those are the 4 basic areas. And then we'll go to a writing sample. In the police officer job, there are a lot of reports they have to write on a regular basis. So we want to get an assessment of, do you have basic writing skills? Also with that exam, we're also assessing essentially listening skills as well, because we're going to show a video of an officer who is taking a report. We are asking the candidates to, am I getting ahead of myself?
I would just go to the next.
Okay, I'm going to.
That tells you the 4 parts.
So those are the 4 parts. I'm actually going.
There you go.
So those are the areas. There's typically 100 questions on the multiple choice exam and a 2-hour time limit. This particular examination is pass-fail. So as long as you hit the minimum requirement, then you are going to pass and move on to the next page or next phase. You're going to get scored for the next part of the exam.
Tell them how much of that information is found in the...
So one of the things I do want to point out, thank you, Amy, is if you could turn to page 8 in the study guide. So we talk about spelling and vocabulary. We give them all the answers. There is not a word in the spelling or vocabulary section that we're going to ask about that isn't provided on this page. So every single word that's on here may be on the examination. So what we do is when we're talking to candidates or potential candidates for the process, we always point out this page. If spelling isn't your strength, then get in there and start to learn these particular words. Make sure you understand them and how to use them in a sentence. So with these particular words, even if it takes you do 5 words a day until you get it done, then you know coming in you can be fairly successful. The vast majority of this examination is based on this part of the in terms of the multiple choice exam, this part of the exam. So getting to know these words and getting to understand them can make a big difference in success. Then we have reading comprehension. With the reading comprehension, we try to get a variety of different prompts. They're not necessarily police-related prompts. They are prompts from a variety of different kinds of backgrounds so that it's not geared towards one direction or another in terms of something that you might enjoy. As I mentioned, it's a 100-item multiple choice exam. We have a 2-hour time limit, and this is scored as pass-fail. The writing sample is, as I mentioned, is a video of a police officer taking a report. In the study guide, there's also what we call relevant information for the different kinds of incidents there are. That relevant information is the things that the candidate should be listening for as that video is going through. So they can get an idea of what that information is that they really need to pay attention to, like suspect information and things along those lines, as they're watching that video, and they can take their notes during the video as much as they want. We also have that relevant information sheet beside them as they take the test. So they know this is the kinds of things they need to pay attention to. But if they study it in advance, they can stay focused more on the video and be prepared when those videos come up, and they know what they need to pay attention to as that video is going on. So they'll take those notes. They can use those notes then to complete what's a form and write a narrative. What we're looking for is, do you have accurate information that was included, and can you write in a manner that we can understand? Is it pretty clear, concise, organized in a way? Does it have the additional information that may have not been in the form that's needed, that's relevant for this particular scenario? So that's what we're looking for on that. Again, this one is a pass-fail. So for candidates who pass that phase of the examination, then we'll score them on the COPE exam. So the COPE exam is a video-based examination where we have 8 different video vignettes. Candidates will go into individual rooms, we'll start the video, and then we will also start recording their responses. So in that, they'll start out by first getting a vignette that's a practice one, so they get the idea of kind of talking to a TV monitor and kind of dealing with the scenario, and then they'll get 8 additional scenarios that would be graded. So we record those responses. They have 45 seconds to respond, and we're scoring on 2 different basic areas for that: problem solving and interpersonal relations. This is the part that's weighted as 100% of the examination. This determines where you finish on the eligible list. If you pass and you are a veteran, you may also have additional points for veterans preference. So when those are done, we will pull all those together and we will then evaluate those. We do a training on the board. We usually have a police officer, a sergeant, and last year we also included, it's always been a civilian, but the third person is a community evaluator, people that we pulled out from the community and wanted to participate. They're actually the third member on each of those boards. So we will provide training regarding the scenarios, regarding what it is that we're looking for in terms of the interpersonal relations and the problem-solving skills. And then they'll grade based upon that criteria, and we'll use those results to determine the bands. And then finally, so with those first 3 phases that I just mentioned, we'll have candidates come and they'll take all 3 phases of the examination at once. That way they don't have to come back too many times in order to get through the entire testing process. So, but once they get past these first 3 phases, then we'll send out a notice for those who do pass and invite them to take the physical exam. This is another examination that's based on a pass-fail basis, and there are 3 events to that, and they are age and gender modified because what we're looking for is physical fitness, and physical fitness for someone who is young and 25 and male is probably a lot different than me being physical, my fitness level, or what's expected to be my fitness level at age 50, so, okay, 54. All right, so the examination timeline for this particular year, the other thing I wanted to mention is we have moved to giving this test annually, so the timeline is pretty close to what you see here on an annual basis. We'll accept applications in July. Early July through August, actually until September 1st, we're going to begin our testing processes. And then we do allow candidates the opportunity to self-schedule, so any particular date that works best for their schedule, they can schedule themselves on that date. And then once all that's done, we start grading. And once that grading is done, we will then invite them back for the physical test, which is scheduled for November. Oh, yeah, so the other thing is, too, sometimes people will self-schedule and something comes up, you get a flat tire on the way. As long as it's not the last day of testing, you're going to be able to come on any alternative test date. So as long as there's space available and there's space available, we're going to allow candidates to test. So as soon as the physical test is over, that's when we establish that eligible list. So with that, I'm going to turn you back over to Amy, who's going to talk a little bit about the statistics or the data.
Everybody likes data. I think it kind of sets a picture and makes things a little easier. I want you to know that you have lots of data in your folder. I'm going to get rid of this and just look off the screen here, I think, if I can see it. As we're looking at this chart was developed from the 2017 police officer exam stats, which is in your folder. You're going to see just the raw data on one side, and you're going to see the percentages on the opposite side. I'm going to talk about several sheets as we go through, so I'll hold them up as we go. But I want to make sure before you get too into that data that I give you some disclaimers and really important things you need to know. So if I'm not exciting, this is the time I need you to really listen, because I want to make sure when you're looking at the multiple data, you understand why it doesn't add up. So this is really important to understand. Because we test police officer candidates every year, even though we know how many candidates we're going to have in each class, we don't have any idea how many candidates are going to accept our offers, how many candidates are going to pass the medicals, how many candidates are going to get through the psychological testing. So when public safety makes their conditional offer, they make more offers than we have in the class, right? So at the end of 2017 in December last year, which would have been people hired from our 2016 list, not the 2017 list, we had a number left over. So that number I call holdovers. And those holdovers from the December 2017 class will show on our statistics on another sheet. So if you're comparing that to the other sheet later, they won't match up exactly, but you'll understand if we have more females than it shows that we had who made it through in the 90 band, that's because those were left over from 2017. Because it really wouldn't be fair for someone to have a conditional offer, go through all the medical, all the psychological, pass everything, and then we say, you have to test again next year. So that's why we have that holdover list. And we want to make sure we fill, if we have 50 slots available for the class, that we get those individuals through the class. So you would have seen those stats, and the stats that you have on that blue sheet is how I came up with these numbers. So I want you to see we had, and this is, I think, the most depressing information for someone like us who goes out and do, I don't know, 20 information sessions between ours and the ones we do with police officer recruiting units and community meetings and recruiting fairs, that we had 2,495 individuals who actually went on and applied through our website. And out of that, less than half of them actually showed up to take all parts of the test. So I don't know what the response is to that, why. Sometimes I think it's a easy system, so it makes it easy for anybody who wants to apply. And so when they're online, they click everything they can and then decide, I don't necessarily want to be a police officer. Or maybe they went home and talked to their family about it, and their family said, do you really want to be somebody who could be shot at? Or last but not least, they found another job between the time they applied and the time the actual testing took place. Don't know what the exact answer is. We've done some surveys. We've done some no-show stuff that I'll talk about a little bit later. But when you get less than half, I think you have bigger hopes that number will be greater. But those who did show up, out of the 1,230, we had 75% of them pass the multiple choice. The one thing that hurts me here is we give them probably 80% of the answers to the test in that study guide. So if they go through the study guide, they have a really likely chance of being successful. What I want to say is when we're looking at our multiple choice, I want to be very clear when we have that information in front of them. If they have that information and they can't learn it, they're not going to make it through the academy, and they're definitely not going to pass the test at the end. And where we mark that line of pass and fail, we know that those people who are close to that line have difficulty in our academy and ultimately many times don't make it through. And when we've tried to move that line down, they don't make it through our academy. And that's just data that we've looked at over the years and know kind of where that pass point needs to be for a successful candidate to make it through our training academy and our and the state test. But again, if they read the information and can learn it, then they're absolutely going to be able to make it through our academy. So it's just having those, I guess, cognitive abilities. Outside of that, that left us with 834 candidates who took the writing sample, and of that, 90% passed the test. And then we go down to looking at the COPE, which is always very exciting for me. We had 716, or 86%. If you look on those blue sheets, you'll notice that our minorities are very good at the oral portion of the test. And it's really helpful that that's the information that we're actually ranking the candidates. It has the least adverse impact of any part of our test ever. And that's because I think there's more life experience that we found when we talk to people about it. Outside of that, it's always interesting that you have 716 pass, already know where they're at on the list, and only 540 showed up to take the physical portion. And, maybe again, it's that point in time where they've taken another job by that time, but you would think if they put all that effort in and made it through there, we would see a greater number. But we don't. And at the end of that, that leaves us with 450 people who made it onto our eligible list. I have a slide that I think is kind of interesting that I just added late last night. And this slide I think is important because I think there's this perception that banding, that there's more white males in the 90 percentile, there's more females in the 70 percentile. And when you look at our 2017 candidates, banding on our eligible list, actually I have this down here, I should probably read what I wrote, basically addressed in Rule 149 of our charter, we're required to have no fewer than 3 bands in the competitive list. You don't have to call it 90, 80, 70, we do. You could call it 1, 2, 3. It's just a mechanism where we have to distinguish groups into 3 groups. So if you imagine a bell curve through college or through high school, that's how we sort those bands out. That's not exactly the science, but that'll give you kind of those numbers and an explanation. And if you can see here, I think our female have the most individuals in the 90 and 80 band, and then I think our Black demographic has the next highest. So for me, when I look at this, I think when we look at the percentages across the demographics and genders, they're pretty consistent, which to me is very exciting. And looking at our tests, I think it indicates that we need to get our numbers up at the beginning to try to help have them throughout the process. Because again, I have the number at the top. If you look at the 450 candidates total that are on the eligible list, you'll see in the green, those are the numbers in each of the bands, and then it goes through the process there, and then the percentage.
Definition of band is. Can you please explain that a little bit?
Yep. Our charter, which is how we operate everything, it tells us that we have to have 3 bands. So it says when you have a competitive list, you have to break it into 3 bands. And that's exactly what our rule says. And so our bands, like I said, doesn't have to be 90, 80, 70. That's what we use and have used for years. It could be 1, 2, and 3, and I think we may go to that because I think 90, 80, 70 makes people believe that they had to get a score of 90, a score of 80, or a score of 70. And that's not necessarily the case. The 90 band could have people who have 120. You know, it just is, when you have the bell curve, we draw the line in 3 and put the top band in the 90, the second band in the 80, and the third band in the 70.
450 candidates,
yes.
And we're only hiring 100 officers this year.
Yes.
So the way you get to that 100 is
through the banding. Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. That's a significance.
Thank you, George. Okay. So, I'm going to give you some data from 2016 and 2017. This data is from 2016, so that would have been the last administration prior to 2017, and would have been the group that we hired in 2017. I want to make sure that before I start that you're looking at each pie and understand that it represents 4 points in the process, and it represents that group at that particular time. So time of application, I don't have the number, so I'm going to scoop my little chart up a little bit. There were 23% Black, 12% minority, and 65% white. When we get to the applicant who actually took the test, we had 19% Black, I can't see the number, 14% other, and 65 white. And you have to imagine you've got 100%, so as people fall out, it would change the percentage of the overall 100%. So then you look at your eligible list, and we have 16% Black, 11% minority, and 73% white. And then when we get to our hire, we had 11% Black, 6% other minority, and 83% white. So when you're looking at that as a whole, you can see that the 3 first pies, if we go in that process, didn't change significantly in looking at it. I think the significance is we got to look at the possibility of where our background standards are and our process from the eligible list to hire. And I think we'll show that again here, but I want to make a good point on this slide that I think 2017 is going to look really good in our hiring process. We're here, but we've only filled the June class. So that last slide for our hiring, I think, is going to look significantly better when we see those numbers of people who are early in the process and ready to be processed through the December class. But when you're looking at these two charts, I think one of the things we do is we're always reviewing our process. So when we went back to 2016 and we say, wow, we had 23% blacks who actually applied, and we only had 19 who showed up. We lost 4% just in show up. Is there something that we could be doing differently? Liz, being the creative that she is, decided, let's do a no-show focus group. And being the not so optimistic person or devil advocate that I like to be, I'm like, if they're no show for the test, are they really going to show for a focus group? But she was bound determined she was going to come up with that, and it worked. Those people actually showed up, gave us some great feedback, and you'll see in 2017, we only lost 1%. So we're hoping that what we got was their recommendation was, oh, I got it through email, and I don't check my email regularly. So the test was already over before I realized I was invited to take it. So we decided we're going to pilot this out. It's a costly thing for us to do, but we mailed U.S. mail the notice to every one of those candidates, and our percentage went up. We held all minorities at 14%, or other minorities, and we only lost 1%. So I'm very optimistic that that's going to be the way we're going to continue to do that process, is send out U.S. mail. We're also looking at what I think would be a great way to do this is also texting, because I think this next generation, email is snail mail, and snail mail is non-existent. So that's on our horizon, and something that maybe you guys can help us with in that process, because I think really that younger generation, being that I have 2 daughters that are getting ready to be 20, if I want to communicate with them, that's the only method that I can get through. So, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to talk about the background standards. And in your folder, all the background standards are in there, and I think that's the last page I want to make sure I hold up. And it should be the last page in your folder. It should say background standards.
Good afternoon. I will be talking about the background removal standards, and as Amy mentioned, they are in your folder. It is a 2-page document, front and back. What are the standards? They are a set of automatic disqualifiers for police officer hiring. They were designed to be as objective as possible, to give people guidelines so you either meet the standards or you do not. Who created the standards? They were created by a committee. It consisted of employees from police, public safety, and civil service. They were adopted by the commission in 1996, early 1996. So before the background standards, we still had background investigations. We just had what were called background guidelines. They were more general. They didn't have specific timeframes. So the committee attempted to come up with specific timeframes for most of the standards so that it's very clear when you can meet them if you do not right now. In the early 1990s, there was a news story on one of the local TV stations about the backgrounds of police officers that had been hired. So that prompted the mayor at the time to appoint a 3-member panel to review the police officer hiring process. So the panel, one of the members was Dr. Ronald Huff, who was an OSU, he may still be a professor at Ohio State, of criminal justice and public policy management. They reviewed the whole process from the beginning, from recruiting all the way to the end, and actually they, more than just the hiring process, they made a list of recommendations. And one of those recommendations was the formation of a committee to review the hiring process. So the committee was put together, and as I already mentioned, it included police officers, civilian HR employees, public safety, civil service. They brought in an outside facilitator to run the meetings, and they also involved the community. They got public feedback on the standards as well as other recommendations in the process to see. We were trying to determine, or the committee was trying to determine, what we want in a police officer, but we also want to know what does the community want to see in a police officer. So the standards were put together then, and similar to what we have now, although they have evolved over time, and adopted by the Civil Service Commission. So the Civil Service Commission is responsible for adopting those standards or changes to the standards, and they go before the commission and they formally adopt them. So the process for the standards, well, first of all, just to back up a bit, there is an initial screening, and Liz mentioned this briefly. We call it an ABQ, which stands for Abbreviated Background Questionnaire. We've been doing this, I think, about 17, 18 years, maybe a little longer, but we have a screening at the very beginning of the process. And the reason for this is, one, it saves the city money to not test people that won't meet the background requirements. Say they used marijuana 6 months ago. It's a disqualifier. So we're not wasting the time and money testing them, but it's also for the applicant's benefit, because we heard that a lot years ago. Oh, if I had known, I wouldn't have taken the test. I wouldn't have taken off time from work to take the test. So it prevents them from wasting their time as well. So there's about 12 questions on the initial application. It's not for every background standard, and as you see, the standards are very extensive. But we try to get at the big categories where we lose people, and then, as I said, reject them at the beginning. There is a review process, which I'll talk about a little bit more with at the end. And then overall, the commission works very closely with police and public safety throughout the process once the list is established. So we develop the standards. The commission is responsible for the eligible list, so we're responsible for removals from the list, and Director DeLong gets those. She reviews them, makes sure they meet the standards or violate the standards, and approves them. But also, the commission does what we call a civil service review of the process. This also came out of that panel from the 1990s. That group recommended that the commission take a more active role in the process. So while the director had always reviewed the removals and approved them, we send out the notices, the panel felt we should be more involved. So civil service reviews the background files after the polygraph and reviews everyone that has taken a polygraph and determines if there's any violations of the background standards. And then the police division reviews them as well, and it's kind of a check and balance where we both see it and make sure that everyone meets those requirements. So removals can be requested by the Division of Police, they can be requested by public safety or by the commission's staff, and they still all go through the director for review. Then we notify them, and again, there is a review process. They're not just completely done. They do have a chance to tell their side of the story. So just briefly, the 3 standards where most applicants are lost. At the ABQ stage, which again is at the beginning when they first apply, we lose the most people for marijuana use in the last year. Our standard is a 1-year standard, but we tend to lose, I think, about 50% of the people the last few years for that. 50% of those who, yes. Sorry, not the whole applicant pool. 50% of those who are rejected are rejected for marijuana use. The second one is an OVI in the last 5 years, and that's operating a vehicle while intoxicated. It's been called DUI, and for several years was called OMVI. It's now currently called OVI. If you have one in the last 5 years, it's disqualifying, and that actually is as an adult or as a juvenile. I didn't mention that, but a lot of the standards really we're trying to get at adult behavior. There are a few minor ones on juvenile behavior, but we really are trying to look at adult activity, adult convictions, and that would be 18 and older. But the OVI standard applies to both juveniles and adults. And then the third standard at the ABQ stage where we lose people is illegal drugs other than marijuana in the last 3 years. So that would include cocaine, heroin use, but it also includes illegal use of prescription drugs. We're seeing a lot more of that, people using painkillers for the effect. So that is our third reason. So once they get to the list, they go through the background investigation, which you'll hear from the background unit and public safety, but later on in the process, they're reviewed again for these standards. And actually, all of our candidates must meet the standards from beginning to end. So if someone gets an OVI the week before the academy starts, they're not going into the class. They're going to be removed later as well. So once they're on that list, again, our top reason for removal is marijuana use. And the second one is other drugs. And the third one, and this also, I'm looking at data since 2016. But the third reason is a tie between a domestic violence incident in the last 10 years, a felony conviction or admission of something that would be a felony, and then polygraph distortion is our third reason that is a tie. And that's when they go through the polygraph, if they are breathing slowly, holding their breath, things that make it difficult for the polygraph examiner to make a determination. So you may wonder why marijuana use is number one at the beginning and number one at the end. So sometimes people are not honest when they apply and they check no. A lot of people are very honest when they go through, and then they later get to the polygraph, they admit to their marijuana use, or the background investigators find it. They are disqualified for that. But also, we have people that apply, take the test, and then use marijuana during the selection process. So that standard applies through the entire process, not just a year before applying. And then the same thing with drug use. And it's also possible, we have people tell us that they're applying online, they're in a hurry, they might be applying on their phone and scrolling. Sometimes people check no, not intentionally being dishonest, they just don't realize that they had answered no, but we do catch it later and we remove them for that. I also wanted to mention that we still, the director had spoken and Liz had talked about the numbers, or I guess the director talked about each step. We lose people throughout the process for people who self-select out of the process, and that means people who withdraw, people who don't show up for their polygraph, people who don't return their personal history questionnaire, which the background unit will talk a little bit about that, but we lose, in the last few years, we've lost about 25% of the people who self-select out. So keeping people interested in the process is very important as well. And then I did just want to briefly mention there is a background administrative review process. Most of our candidates call it an appeal. It's not technically called an appeal, but we do have a review process. So whether they are an applicant at the beginning or very end of the process they get removed, they can explain their side of it and why they think they meet the background standards, why they think they should be reinstated. It is a paper review process. They do not come in and appear before the commissioners. They don't come in and have a hearing, but we tell them to have a complete explanation in writing of why they think they meet the standards. And then our 3-member commission reviews them. If they are granted, they return to the process. They go back where they left off, get scheduled for their next step. And if they are denied, then they can apply again. One other thing I wanted to mention, though, is the background standards are what we consider minimum standards for the job. It doesn't mean if you meet all of those that you will get hired. So, for example, we could have an applicant that had theft of $2,000 worth of merchandise, and it was 6 years ago. So technically they meet the standards. However, that person is unlikely to be selected by Director Pettis because of that recent theft history. So they are just the minimal requirement, and the rest of the selection process helps determine the best candidates. And then finally, we do review the standards. We are always reviewing them. As I said, they did not look exactly like this in 1996. They've changed over time. We listen to feedback from the police division. We listen to feedback from the safety director's office, our fire division, as they have very similar standards. If we feel we're losing good candidates for a certain reason, we will take a look at it. So we have changed employment over the years. We used to have a standard where you had to have steady employment for the last 5 years, and we had a calculation, you had to average a certain amount. Well, with the economy changes, not everybody has that, and we felt like we were losing good people, so we did get rid of that standard. And then in 2014, we had a major review of the standards with our police officer selection committee, and that is a group of us that meet monthly, and again from safety, the commission, and the police division. We looked at the standards we had an all-day retreat. We had experts come in and talk to us. We had people, the commander from narcotics come in and talk about illegal prescription use. We had people from the prosecutor's office, and Mr. Furby from police came in and talked about the domestic violence. And so we made some major changes. One of them was we got rid of our license suspension standard. So for years, we always removed people if you had a license suspension. So now you still, if you have a suspension for an OVI, you'll be removed for the OVI. But if you have a suspension because your insurance lapsed for 2 or 3 days and then you got your insurance back, but your license was suspended, you will not be removed for that. And that standard did tend to remove a higher percentage of minority candidates, so we determined based on the committee review that we were going to get rid of that standard and just keep the one for traffic tickets and the OVIs. And we also, in that process, we did get some community input again, just to see what they felt and that they did not have any issues with the standards. So they do continue to evolve, and we look at them every year and do statistics and then make changes based on that. And I think that is it, and I'm going to turn it back over to the director.
I'm going to speed this through in about 30 seconds so you guys have an opportunity to ask questions because we're running a little longer than I thought we would. Basically, I wanted to do just a 10-second recap. If you look at the green slide, this is what we are responsible for, green and orange, what we're responsible for. The green is the hiring process, and the orange is more of the compliance process. So it kind of gives you an overall view of what we do. I always like to remind everybody that the appointing authority has the hiring decisions in the department. We are the person that's assuring those hiring decisions are in line with the charter and the civil service rules. And that allows us to have checks and balances throughout the process. I have 4 additional slides that I'm not going to go over, but they're in your packet, and I hope at some point that we get some questions about those. Those are ongoing efforts to increase diversity. I think there's a lot of things that we've done over the years and that we're continuing to do that people don't know. So I've included those in here, and if you have any questions, we'll be available to answer those at the end, and I really appreciate all of your attentiveness and eagerness to learn about what we do at Civil Service.
Thank you. And I do note that I believe the chair of the commission, Judge Grady Pettigrew, is here with us today. Are there other commission members with you today?
There are not. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Your Honor. Questions?
Is there anything in the background process that directly asks a candidate if they are part of an organization that supports racism, if they're racist? I mean, straight up asking them, are you racist? Are you a Nazi? Are you a terrorist? Do you ask that direct question at any point during the process?
Yes, we do ask questions about terrorism, and actually we have a form, I believe all new employees we fill out.
I don't think we fill it out. I don't think by law we have to fill it out anymore.
Okay, we did have a form that they had to sign that they were not a member of any of these groups. But we do ask about terrorism. We have changed the Division of Police has changed the background questionnaire a bit, so they might be able to address that. But the previous background history or personal history questionnaire did ask about racism and any type of beliefs or behavior. So we did ask that. I believe it's still in there, but they can probably address that further.
Who
Yes.
is they that can address that?
Yes, I'm sorry. The background unit is going to talk along with the human resources manager from police and then Director Pettis' office.
When they speak now.
So they might be able to address that. Yes?
I had a couple of questions about the psychological evaluation portion. What instrument is used during the eval process?
They use a number of instruments. Who's they? We contract out with a local psychologist's office to do the psychological screening. We are currently, and we have been using for a while, the Association for Psychotherapy, and they are on East Broad Street, just in downtown Columbus. The psychologist's office decides which instruments to use, but they use several, and I want to say the California Personality Inventory is one. We no longer use the MMPI. There is a safety and security Hilson survey that is used, and that is also used for firefighter. And I know I'm missing, there's a Hogan personality inventory. So there's 3 or 4 that are used, so it's not based on just one particular instrument. And then then they evaluate the results, and they also do a clinical interview with the applicant, ask them a lot of questions. They actually review the background file as well.
To your knowledge, are any of those re-administered at any point? Like if an incident happens during training or something like that, do you know if there's any kind of review or re-administration?
I do not know, but I know that the division contracts with the psychologist's office for critical incident counseling and various things, but I do not know if they would re-administer the instruments.
And we can actually get you those exact names of those instruments for this group for your next meeting. We can have that information for you.
Yes. Yes.
Typically, how long is the process from filing the application to field training?
That's a good question. One of the things when we're talking to candidates, one of the things we tell them is that when you're coming in to take the test for this year, it's for all classes that happen the following year. So they'll apply in July. Sorry. So for candidates, anyone who takes a test for this year are eligible for classes that will attend that they can attend next year. So for these July applications, their first opportunity at a job is in June of next year. Their second opportunity is in December, and then we start the process again.
Testing is at the very end, so it's almost a year process at that point, once you're hired.
Right. And then if you're hired, you're then now on active duty from there, or you go into field training?
Sure, so you're on that 1-year probation. You go through your training academy. You'll go through the field training with 4 different field training officers. If all that checks out, you pass the academy, you pass the OPATA test, you pass your field training, you are now an officer. Yes.
Through the training academy and field training.
Right. So it sounds more like maybe...
You become a police officer, if you will, after the field training and the test, I should say.
Right, okay.
Before that, you're going through the academy.
Or something.
Exactly.
Yes, okay, got it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wasn't looking over here, so I don't know what first pertain.
A couple questions. First, around the backgrounds. You talked about a background check investigation or examination or looking into background. Is that state, local, and federal, or is it just state background checks? Can you talk about that a little bit?
We will also have the Division of Police Background Office is going to present next, so they will talk about that, but it is, yes, state, local, and federal.
Then I'm not sure which one of you mentioned that there is a preference and the numbers go up around veterans and military folks. Yes. And with that, and us all recognizing that the trauma of military, is there additional mental health testing with that group of folks done as they go through the testing process?
They'll go through the same psychological test every candidate goes through. So if there is a problem there, that should be picked up at that point.
Can you explain why there's a preference for veterans a little more? Is it because we feel like they're more equipped, or I don't want to put more words in your mouth?
There's historical reasons for that. The idea is that you have people who have served in the military and given potentially giving up their life or that sort of thing to serve our country. And once they do that, and they've done that successfully, and they get discharged on honorable discharge, then this is an opportunity to actually move them up a little bit to give them credit for that type of service.
But there's no thought around the fact that a lot of our military, and my family has served in the military as well, come back with a lot of mental health issues. My uncle works for the Veteran Affairs, and there's documents that support that. So I'm just curious, are we thinking about the mental health and stability as we prioritize veterans?
I do think that's part of it with the psychological and as well as the medical. Our doctors will evaluate any type of medication that they take, including, but for anyone really, anxiety medication, depression medication. And then, sometimes the doctor will send our applicants through to a psychiatrist just to get clearance from that psychiatrist, as well as going through the psychological. So they do get a pretty thorough check, but we are aware there are some issues when veterans return.
Is that throughout the history as a police officer? I'm sorry. Once that's done.
I think maybe one of the directors could speak about it. We do have an employee assistance program for all employees.
Likewise, if there's a critical incident, there's mandatory testing after that incident. Yes. Well, after, in terms of any critical incident, prior, in terms of if through our employee assistance program, and there's also various mechanisms that we try to discern to discover if employees are having issues.
Oh, after and before?
Drug testing, I do not believe so with respect to after an incident. However, there is drug testing for cause that does occur. Would be both. Any employee, actually it's any employee, not only police and fire, but any employee in the city of Columbus.
How many versions of the exam are there, and how often are they changed? So do you use the same exam forever? Is it?
Yes, we use very similar exams from year to year. What we do, I mentioned that we have 100 test questions on the exam. Only 80 of those are scored. The other 20 are there to give us stats so we can look at those before we would incorporate them into an examination and live scoring. So we do kind of rotate some of the items out or in. We try to look at the stats to make sure we have good results in terms of how those items are performing. And so we continually do rotate that. The segments, in terms of the sections of the exam, that's been in place for a number of years.
So just so I'm clear, there is one set of 100 questions in the multiple choice, and you cycle through them, only counting 80 at a time.
Right. So for example, we might have, for example, coming up for this examination, we may have 3 versions of the exam. The 80 questions are going to be on all 3 of those exams that are going to be scored, and then we'll pilot test for those other 20 items that aren't scored. We'll pilot test, so they'll have some differences in some of the questions from one test to another in terms of the versions, but in terms of what's scored, it'll be exactly the same.
I have one more question. So let me go to my notes.
Say one thing. So if someone takes it one year and comes back the next year, they have a pretty good idea of what's on the test, especially in the multiple choice. Because remember, we're just testing at that point their ability to be able to learn through the process so they can get through the academy.
I'm glad you said that, because my question goes there. What about intergenerationally? What about father, son, uncle, brother, nephew, the ability to pass this information through families so that you end up with unintentional nepotism, if you will?
I think they have the same ability as everybody else because we're giving them the study guide, which has probably 80% of the answers in that guide. And if they have that, 80% is going to get them to the pass line.
It's probably going to be easier to learn those vocabulary words from the study guide than it would be to try to memorize each of those questions. We don't ever give out the answers to the questions in terms of what the key is, so what they share with other people is only going to be what's on the test in terms of the questions, but most of that's already in your study guide.
Absolutely. I don't want to focus purely on the multiple choice portion, because there are other portions of the test and there are expectations that come with those, and experience can assist in your ability to pass those portions if those expectations are shared by individuals who have taken it. So thank you. I think you answered my question clearly. I did have a question though about the data on why the white and
we were only addressing multiple choice.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So with the writing sample, we also have 3 different versions of that particular exam, and we have multiple versions of the COPE exam as well.
And we're changing those scenarios.
Not annually.
Not annually, but ongoing.
Thank you. So, one other question about the statistics around the increase in individuals who take the test, who apply, all the way through to hired. And the white applicants and the other minority applicants, there is no change or an increase from application to actually hiring relative to the black applicants. And I was wondering, do you guys measure why that happens? To go from 15% down to 4 or 20, over 20% down to 4% hired. And then, yes, I'm looking at 16 and 17, the phenomenon was consistent, even though the drop was significantly greater in 17.
Really look at yet because we're not all the way through hiring for that list.
Okay.
We got the December class, and like I said, I'm really hopeful for that list. So for 2016.
So part of my question goes to, at the beginning, the applicants were 65% white, but 83% white were hired. Is that a function of the overall number that applied, or the people from the previous year that were then looked at because they were in the 90 band?
Some of both.
Okay. And so then what?
90 band. It could be 80 band, 70 band. Probably 80 band. We probably got through, what do you think, 2 bands last year? We got through the 90 and 80 band with about 400 because if you think about it, not every one of those people in the 90 band are going to make it through the background, physicals, and psychological. So, is it one of 3?
One of 5, I believe.
So for every 5 candidates that go through that process, 1 will be hired. That's kind of how we're looking at it from the eligible list to the actual hire. And it's for a variety of reasons. It could be when the director does his review, things that he sees on there that are just not, many incidents of small theft, but it's ongoing. It could be, I see these things a lot of times come across my desk. It's just a variety of reasons why people don't get from the eligible list to the hiring.
So we spent a lot of time, especially, I can talk more about the testing part of it. We spent a lot of time trying to find out why those differences occur and try to minimize that as much as possible. So one of the things that we noticed in 16 was the show rates weren't the same. So minorities and black applicants were not coming at the same rate in terms of just showing up to the test. So what we tried to do is dig down and find out exactly what's happening that is causing that. And so we try to increase our mailings, try to increase our information that's going out. The other thing that we've learned is a lot of it is through those same focus groups and also through a study that was done in 1998. A lot of it is the support they have with their community. So minorities, women, both groups have a tendency to consider their peers, the people that they live with, the people that they love, in terms of that choice of a profession. And if they're getting negative feedback, they're more likely, in terms of, I don't want you to be a police officer, they're more likely to not necessarily pursue that particular thing if they're getting pressures not to do that from their family members and others. So there was a study that was done that was also highlighted and repeated in the focus groups that we did. Yeah, so it's
in one of our.
We have it?
But we can get that. We listed it in one of our things, so I want to write it down.
So I have a question. So on the chart, we have sent PHQ and then showed PHQ, and then after that we have passed the background standards. So after you get the show PHQ, that is your pool for then who is eligible for the background standards, is that correct?
Yes, once the PHQs are submitted to the background unit, they start the background investigation process. They have the polygraph, but yeah, that's our pool that
All right,
starts.
so then, so to piggyback then on that question, is we spend a lot of time talking about the applications to who has taken the test, but what we have not had a robust conversation on is the actual background standards and those who actually pass it. So just looking at these raw data, these numbers here, there is a clear racial disparity in terms of black males, white females, black females, in terms of the proportion as to who actually passes that background removal standards. And you can see there is a significantly higher likelihood if you are a white male that you're going to pass that background removal standards in comparison to all of the other racial groups. And so I'm kind of concerned and wondering, could you all speak a little bit about that process and how that happens?
I think the best thing to do is actually transition to let them, because that's what they're here, that's the next segment of this, is to let the background group talk about that process and be able to answer all those questions.
But also you gotta remember there's 4 times as many white people who actually showed up to take the test, down through the percentages on the, if you're looking at the 2017.
Looking
Okay, I
at
thought
the
you said I was
percentages
looking
and
at- I'm sorry.
comparing those.
So they get some preference at some point in that process. Can you explain more about that and the criteria or how it plays into the scoring?
So what they have to do, first of all, they have to pass. We are not going to give any veterans preference points for anyone who doesn't pass the examination. Once they pass, then they can get an additional either 5 points or 10 points. 5 points if they were honorably discharged, and then they could get 10 points if they have a disability as a result. So if they were discharged with a disability of some sort, then they would get 10 points. And that gets added to the end. In most cases, in some cases, it doesn't really even, if you're already in the 90 band, it doesn't necessarily make a difference. But if you're in the 80 band and you're just at the cusp, then it could get you into the 90 band.
And I don't think, did she touch that or do you control it?
No, it was on when I was talking. It works on.
I think they're actually.
What I'm saying is, in the beginning, we've already separated out a group and made a preference. And so, if it's 5 to 10 points in scoring on the written test, or is it across the board every time they go through a phase, they get another 5 to 10 points?
Just at the very end.
Okay, but that precedence is set for that individual group in the beginning.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there any other situation that would give somebody additional points, or is it veterans the only one that gives them additional points? Okay.
Sure, Jackson. And this was said at the beginning, the reason that veterans get points is because voters approved a charter amendment that allows for that. So that's why that's the only interest group that gets those points.
Other groups can get preference points?
That's something that we would have covered, but yes.
So it's only through vote that can even happen?
The charter establishes these criteria and does not allow for preference for any other group.
Okay.
I think the conversation about the exam itself, so the process in which an individual becomes a police officer is based upon a job analysis. And so is there a particular process where a job analysis is reviewed? Is it accurate? Is it contemporary? Is it encompassing all of the criteria that someone has said is necessary for an individual to come in through the door?
So we do it's every 8 years that we update the police officer job analysis. With that, what we do is we have surveys that we'll send out to people who are in the job. They will complete those. We look at the tasks that they do, their abilities, their knowledge, the skill sets that they need, and we'll ask them questions about all of those different parts of the job. The tools that they use is all part of that survey. In addition to that, our analysts will do job observations, they'll do interviews, they'll do what we call technical conferences. We'll look at the results of those job analyses and ask them, does this make sense, or help explain this? You know, we'll kind of go through that so we have a good understanding of what that is. I'll be honest, it surprised me the last time we did a job analysis that spelling still came out high, for example, but it did.
Is this a contract that establishes the job analysis, or is this?
We do that in-house.
In-house.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. I was reading through the phases of training. Is COPE the only test that is not pass-fail? That's the only one?
Right, that's the one that determines where you're going to finish in the band.
So that's determining the banding. And is the COPE, you mentioned that there was a 3-member board. Then does that have the ability to be subjective if the 3 of us are banding someone? We talk a lot about implicit bias. If we have 3 different people and that's how they're banded and processed, is that, I mean,
we spend a lot of time on training. In our training, we talk about rater biases, and we'll go through each one of those potential biases that might occur when you are grading to try to help people avoid those. We give them tips on how to avoid those kind of biases as they're doing the evaluation, and then we also give them very detailed tools in terms of here's what a 5 looks like, here's what a 3 looks like, here's what a 4 looks like. So they utilize those tools throughout the process. As you're sitting as a board and you're going through those, then you'll first do what's called an independent rating. So you'll rate that independently without any information from anyone else. You'll then share what those scores are. And then once, if they are not within a certain amount, we require that board to discuss before they come up to the final scores. And they'll do that for each of the scenarios.
and then, so if the COPE is the most subjective test that we have, why aren't the other tests utilized as far as the banding instead of just being pass-fail?
Well, first of all, that's the most important part of the job is the problem solving and interpersonal skills. So the job analysis shows that very clearly. I think anyone who's had any type of interaction with police officers, I've had many say that the most important tool I use is my mouth. And so that's why that's weighted the most and considered the most important in terms of banding. The other thing that's also nice about that particular tool in terms of selection is that there's no impact. I mean, equally, you're seeing minorities and females performing on that examination, so you have a more robust look in each of the bands.
Over here. Yes.
Here, does it drill deeper at all? Like, for example, under Black, does it drill deeper to Somali, Congolese? Do we have that data? None.
Let's take our break if we're going to stay on schedule. Thank you so much for presenting. And are you staying for the second session? So in case we have you, thank you. We'll have times for question and answer in case we don't have the other group, although something tells me that's not going to be true. We may have another question for you. So we have a break until 5 o'clock. I think we're starting off with Director Pettis. Do you just, I believe. We're going into the session on the director's process for hiring. You are you going to be there or there? Or, yes, right there? Okay,
I'm going
good.
to be here
yes. Okay.
briefly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. My name is Ned Pettis. As I told you earlier, I'm the Director of Public Safety. Civil Service has already described in detail their role. I believe at another time, police recruitment will be here along with representatives from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to give you a presentation on their role. But in my office, Mark Gramlich, if you would stand and take the podium, he compiles the information and presents it to me for my review. He has with him Miranda Vollmer and Rick Blunt, who compiled the data that he has, that he presents to me, and what I consider are background issues that are not covered by civil service removal standards. I believe Brenda gave an example that someone may pass the civil service process, but maybe they downloaded $2,000 worth of video or something, but it wasn't within the time frame to be a civil service removal standard. So in my review, for instance, we start a class of 50 police officers on Monday. So Mark Gramlich may compile information for 75 candidates that successfully completed the civil service process, and he'll present information to me on all 75. So because I don't have to choose that candidate that did that, there may be another candidate that wouldn't have those issues. So there could be financial issues, reports from prior employers, admissions on a polygraph exam that, for instance, could have been use of marijuana more than 12 months ago, but I have the option to choose from among all of the candidates. And I believe Mark gets those who are in the 90 band, and we don't move to the 80 band until we exhaust the 90 band, that type of thing. Let me give you an example. The 50 that start Monday, the police recruit class of 50 will start on Monday. 41 of them have college degrees, 7 associate degrees, and 34 bachelor's degrees. That's one, education is one of the elements that's a part of the information that's presented to me. Whether they have OPATA certification or not is part of the information. There are references that were received, good or bad, and as I mentioned before, admissions on the polygraph exam, whether there's evidence of immaturity or not. So there are just a number of different things, and these three are going to give you details, and Mark Gramlich is going to give you an example of a good one that we gave a conditional offer to, because after my review is the conditional offer, they still may not make it through the medical exam or something of that nature. And he's going to give you an example of one who I did not appoint. And then he has Miranda she's the HR manager, and Rick Blunt, who compiles the background data, and they provide it to Mark Gramlich. And so I'll turn it over to Mark Gramlich.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Mark Gramlich, and I'm currently serving as a human resources analyst in the safety director's office. Prior to that time, I was a Columbus police officer for 33 years. In 1999, at the rank of lieutenant, I was assigned to the personnel administration section. One of the areas of my purview was the background investigation unit. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. This afternoon, we're going to take a detailed look at the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety's role in the police officer selection process. This is a lengthy and detailed process involving civil service, several units within the Division of Police, and the Director of Public Safety. At each phase of the process, our goal is to ensure that we recruit and select the most qualified candidates for the position of police officer, and to ensure that we are reaching and recruiting candidates from all the communities and populations that make up the city of Columbus. As the director pointed out, Rick and Miranda are here to give us more detailed information about the background investigation process and then the oral board process. So I'll begin with the overview of the process as it relates to the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety. The first slide up there is recruitment. The Division of Police has a unit dedicated exclusively to recruiting candidates for the position of police officer. They attend recruiting events at churches, colleges, career fairs, etc., in order to get potential candidates to sign up for and take the civil service examination for the position. Members of the unit also employ retention strategies to assist candidates who are signed up to test and those that are on the eligible list, for example, providing assistance during the background investigation process and training for the physical capabilities test and the stress test. The application
have recruitment as a main topic for today. However, the person who helps to oversee that, Randall Sistrunk from our diversity office, he happened to be on vacation. So recruitment and our diversity initiatives that Amy hinted at will be covered prospectively in another meeting.
Okay, and then to reiterate what civil service said, there's an application process. During that period of time designated by civil service, applications are taken for the upcoming police exam. Moving along to testing, and again, as we've covered before, there's 4 phases of that test: the multiple choice, the writing sample, the COPE portion, and the physical capability exam, which consists of the run, the push-ups, and the sit-ups. Okay, after that testing, the eligible list is established. Candidates who pass all phases of the examinations are placed on a banded eligible list, 90, 80, and 70, based upon the COPE scoring. Candidates are processed in band order, beginning with the 90 band. The background investigation process is conducted by the Background Investigation Unit of the Division of Police. That consists of a polygraph examination, the investigation itself into the family history, criminal and traffic checks, credit history, employment, and personal references. When that's completed, there's an oral board interview, and then there's a review of the information by the chain of command at the Division of Police, and that's the Professional Standards Bureau Commander and the Administrative Subdivision Deputy Chief. The oral board interview is conducted at the Division of Police. The board generally consists of a police supervisor, 1 police officer, and a human resources representative. The next part of the process is the review of the candidates by the appointing authority. That would be Director Pettis. He has 2 options at that point: a conditional offer of employment, which enables a candidate to continue to the medical phase of the process. And the second is appeared not appointed, A&A, and that essentially removes the candidate from the eligible list. At this stage, background issues not governed by civil service background removal standards, including finances, polygraph admissions, maturity concerns, etc., are taken into consideration by the director in reaching his final decision. Those that receive a conditional offer proceed to the medical and psychological phase, consisting of the medical evaluation, stress test, and psychological evaluation. Candidates passing all those tests are appointed to an upcoming academic class. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rick to provide a little more information about the background investigation process.
All right, good evening. As Mark said, my name is Rick Blunt. I'm a public safety manager with the Columbus Division of Police over the background investigation and polygraph units. And tonight I'm just going to speak with you briefly about our role in this hiring process, which is the background investigation and the polygraph examination. So as Civil Service said, they come up with the eligible list, which is golden for us because that's when we come out the gates and it's time for us to get busy with our portion. So when that eligibility list is released, we immediately send out a email to all candidates, depending on what band we're working. I think as they alluded to in Mark, we have to work the 90 band first before we can do the 80 band. So when it first comes out, we're looking at the 90 band. And so we send it out to all 90 band candidates. An email through a software system that we use. It's called the Peace Officer Background Investigation Tracking System, or POBITS for short. And it's been really efficient for us to be able to communicate in the 21st century. We used to have a paper copy that we would have to, hand out at these informational sessions, which caused them to come in more times. And so this has been really effective for us, this POBIT system. You may remember civil service referred to the PHQ, that stood for the Personal History Questionnaire, that is now referred to as the PHS, the Personal History Statement. Same concept, it's just a questionnaire about their background. But again, in this system, it's called the Personal History Statement. So we invite them, all the people in the 90 band, to log into this POBIT system. They log in, they fill out the questionnaire, along with some supplemental forms. Those supplemental forms being waivers for us to be able to do our job and send questionnaires to their previous employers, to other law enforcement agencies, and to get information about if they said they live somewhere else in the country or in the state. We send a questionnaire to any law enforcement agency, local, state, county, what have you. So that's the first phase. So we immediately send that out. We set a deadline for them to return that. It was referred to that if they don't return it within that deadline, then we are going to recommend them for removal from the process. But those that do, as they start to flow in, because everybody doesn't take the whole time that we give them. Some of them start rolling back in a couple of days. And so when we have, no magic number, but maybe 20 or so, I'll gather my staff, set a meeting with my staff, and we start to go through them. Because again, these lists, it could be 150 or so people on each one of these lists. And so, we process them. When they start to roll in, I meet with the staff, and we start to review them for the background removal standards, okay? That's what governs everything that we do in this process is the background removal standards. So that's why you'll see that these arrows pointing over to the background, to the removal box, because at any stage that has an arrow to it, they can be removed or recommended for removal. I don't have the authority to remove anybody, nor does my staff. We recommend removal, and Director DeLong makes that final decision. So we review for removal standards, and those that, again, meet a removal standard are recommended. Those that don't move on to the next phase, which is the background check, and we call it mailers. The background checks, I believe someone asked about the checks. Ma'am, I believe it was you. You asked where they are federal, state, and local checks. We check for criminal history. We check for traffic history. We check for financial or credit history through Equifax. We check social media briefly. And we check if they had any interaction with the judicial system or court system, be it civil or criminal. We also look into that as well. So that's our check. We have a checklist that we go down, and we check a series of databases, again, national, state, and local, for these things. Mailers, what that is, again, through POBITs, we're able to communicate with previous employers through email, which allows us to get responses back quicker and to them quicker than using U.S. Postal Service like we used to do. However, if the candidate does not provide an email address, then we have to send those questionnaires out via U.S. Postal Service, which in turn, unfortunately will slow them down in the process because we have to get information back we don't wait until we get everything back, but I'm just saying, if they were to provide an email address, it allows us to do our jobs more efficiently. So that's what the mailer portion of this is. We start sending those mailers out as soon as we review and know that they don't meet a removal standard at this point by any of the information they provided thus far in their PHS. The next phase is going to be the pre-interview and polygraph. During this phase, we invite them to come in and meet with an investigator, a background investigator. When they meet with this investigator, the purpose is to review the PHS that they've submitted, to ensure that all of the information is accurate, make sure there aren't any changes, maybe the contact information has changed, address, phone number, what have you, to make sure they didn't recall another incident of drug use or some type of criminal activity or whatever. This is another chance for them before they go to the polygraph, to be honest, and let us know if there's anything, that they accidentally omitted from their PHS. In addition, they also bring in all of their official documents. By official documents, I mean transcripts, birth certificates, Social Security cards, selective service, proof of selective service registration, and things like that. We make copies of all of those things, and put them in their file. And then the last thing before they go into the polygraph, we take them to the ID unit, the police ID unit, and their photograph is taken, their fingerprints are taken, and if they have any tattoos that are or may be in violation of the Division of Police tattoo policy, those tattoos are photographed as well. Because if they are in violation of the tattoo policy, they will have to have those removed prior to graduation. So after all of that is done, they go into the polygraph, they take their polygraph examination. After the polygraph, at some point, someone from Civil Service Commission will come over. That's usually Brenda Sobiak. She'll come over and review all the information that we have thus far to ensure that they do not meet a removal standard. If they do, she or one of us will recommend removal. If they do not, then she'll certify that file for processing, and we will continue on with our investigation. The next phase, it says background investigation, and these are the areas that we look at. And during our background investigation, it doesn't start here. It's actually going on through this whole process, as you've probably heard. But this is kind of like when we start to connect the dots and gather any missing information that we do not have, or if there's something that we still have a question about, or like if an employer hasn't reached back, hasn't returned our questionnaire, we'll pick up the phone, we'll call and try to reach out to them and make every effort we can to ensure we have a thorough investigation. After that, again, this is the final time that the candidate will meet with the background investigator. We call it the background final interview. And we meet with them out at the police academy. We meet with the candidate and their spouse or significant other, or their roommate, or their mother or father, whoever they live with and knows them the best. We'll ask them to come as well. If they can't, that's okay. But we like to get both parties in. We do a joint interview with them together, and we also interview them separately because, of course, if there's anything to be told, they may not want to say it in front of the candidate. So, for instance, if there's a domestic violence issue or whatever it may be. So we do interview them separately. So. And again, this is the investigator's last chance to gather any information or, fill in any gaps that they don't, and for information that they don't have thus far. If I may back up, during the polygraph, there are 3 different outcomes of a polygraph. There is no deception indicated, or inconclusive. Okay, so if a test is inconclusive, it's probably what Brenda referred to as the candidate tried to deceive the polygraph in some way, shape, or form. Like she said, usually it's in the form of them trying to control their breathing or whatever. Or it may be that the charts read that they were being deceptive in a certain area. So if we think that they were being deceptive in a certain area, like if they do, if the conclusion is that they are deceptive, sometimes we'll call them back and for a specific issue polygraph, okay? And then during the pre-employment polygraph is the same for everybody, okay? We ask the same questions. We go over the questions before they even take the exam, so it's no surprises. We ask them the exact same questions during the pre-interview as we do during the actual exam. But for a specific issue polygraph, we only ask specific questions on the area that the chart showed that they were being deceptive about, okay? So it's kind of like a second chance for them to be honest and pass this test. So moving on, like at the background finder interview, the investigator gathers the information, they interview everybody, and then they come back and start working on their final product, which is our product to the oral board as well as the chain of command, which is our investigative summary. This is when we put it in the box and tie a bow on it and summarize everything that we've gathered about this candidate, okay? And then they type up their investigative summary, and then they put their what we call oral board package together, which is everything that that we submit to the oral board and the chain of command, which at a minimum is going to be the investigative summary, the polygraph summary, the Equifax report, and the PHS. Okay, again, the personal history statement that the candidate submitted. So we put that all together. Right now, we're doing it on a laptop, so we just loaded up on all 3 laptops for the oral board members to see, and then the candidate is scheduled for their oral board, it's called a personal evaluation board, but we call it an oral board, and they appear in front of that 3-member panel, and Miranda Vollmer, our HR manager, is going to speak more about the oral board. But that's the background process in a nutshell. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Just a couple additional things in the background investigation process. The staff is made up. Rick is a civilian employee for the Division of Police. He's a public safety manager. We have 2 sworn police officers in the unit, as well as two public safety analysts, and those 2 members are 2 retired police officers who now are back as civilians in the unit as well. So that makes up the unit who does these background investigations, and we also use different officers from patrol. They come up for 60 days during our processing time from like January till May when it's very busy to assist the unit as well. So for the oral board phase, some people ask, what is an oral board? All an oral board is a job interview. It's a different job interview that we've created, and there's different steps. So I'm going to go over the steps in the oral board for you. So a couple of the steps. So the oral board is comprised of 6 structured oral interview questions. Following that, we ask 4 additional standardized questions, and then the panel is free to ask about the background of the candidate who's in front of them from the information comprised by the background investigation unit. So how those structured oral interview questions are written is I developed those questions using a subject matter expert group in a similar fashion to how civil service goes about making their tests. We use the job analysis established by civil service for the classification of police officer. We identified the top-rated job competencies for a police officer, and then a group of field training officers, academy recruit basic training staff members, oral board members, and division supervisors all met for a 2-day workshop, and they helped create the questions. How they're created is they write critical incidences, and then we review them all together, and then we write a standardized answer scale to which to rate those questions to. So those are the first 6 questions. They're typically, some of them are hypothetical based, such as what would you do in this scenario, and then some of them are behavioral based, asking them such as, describe a time in your life where you failed at something, and how did you overcome that failure, and what steps did you take to not have that failure again. So that asks the candidate to draw on past experiences that they have had to demonstrate how they could overcome failure. So during the oral board, it is 1 sworn supervisor, it is 1 sworn police officer, and it is 1 HR representative. We conduct training every year for oral board members, including all the HR staff. It is a 1 or 2-day training that we host every year in November or December. So those police officers or supervisors who wish to be a member of the oral board, they submit a paragraph to Rick and I and to their chain of command indicating why they want to be an oral board member. And then we submit the names of those that we recommend to be part of the oral board to Chief Jacobs, and she sends us the list back of who's approved to be an oral board member and who is not. Typically, it's everyone who volunteers is usually approved to be an oral board member. So during the oral board, the candidate is brought in. We have them at the police academy. We ask the HR representative in the room, ask the 6 structured oral interview questions. They have separate training of how to ask those questions and how to ask those follow-up questions. After those, we ask standardized questions before the background starts. Some of those such as, what are some leadership activities you're a part of your community, of your church, of your school, of whatever you've done? Why do you want to be a police officer? Some of those standard questions that you would ask somebody during an interview. After those 4 standard interview questions, it's an open question session on the candidate's background. So we have various different forms that are required to be filled out by the oral board. So those forms are, after the interview is over, the candidate leaves. The oral board rates the structured oral interview questions 1 through 6, with the answer key that's provided. They then make a rating on the candidate's communication throughout the interview, and then they make one overall consensus rating on a scale from 1 to 5. And that means that all 3 panel members have to come to a consensus on which number they're going to rate the candidate. Then the board, each member submits a summary to close out the board. So they write, the candidate answered these questions this way. This is if the candidate had, let's just say they didn't meet a background removal standard, but they had a theft 5 years ago from something. They might write, the candidate had this theft and these are the reasons why they took it, or these are how the candidate showed remorse or took responsibility for those actions. One of the main things in the oral board we're looking for is an applicant to take responsibility for their actions that are in their past. Not everybody has a perfect past, and that's okay. We have a diverse group of people at the division who have all sorts of things that they've done in their past. The most important thing we're looking for is someone's ability to take responsibility for whatever happened or didn't happen, and how they move forward from that. So we take that information, and it is then sent back to the background unit. Rick prepares another form, and the chain of command review, they have a separate rating scale where they rate the candidate on a 1 through 5 scale that is different. The reason that is different is because the oral board rating scales are written in a way because we see the candidate and we can ask them appropriate questions. The chain of command does not see them, so they have a different rating scale because all they're reviewing is do a document review of the information that's in the file. As Mark said, it goes to the Professional Standards Bureau commander. The Professional Standards Bureau is comprised of research and development and the accreditation team. So that commander is in charge of ensuring that all division policies and directives are updated. So it goes there, and then to the administrative deputy chief, who is the deputy chief over the Professional Standards Bureau commander and the HR bureau as well. So once they go, that's all done. They are submitted to Mr. Gramlich in the Public Safety Director's office for their review. Before they get a conditional offer, the OPATA commission that we were talking about earlier, they have a new set of standards. 120 days out from the start of OPATA classes, all recruits that are going to be in your academy have to pass a physical fitness test. It's a state mandate. So 120 days out from the academy, we run the 1.5-mile run, push-ups and sit-ups. The basic training staff administers that, and then they give us a list of these are the people who pass, these are the people who failed. If you fail, you get to make it up one time. You do have to pass all 3 standards in the series, so the run, the push-ups, and the sit-ups. So if you failed the push-ups the first time, you have to do all 3 activities the second time as well. If you pass that OPATA physical fitness test, you're then eligible for a conditional offer of employment. And I'll give it back over to Mark so he can share with you what he does for that.
Thank you, Miranda. Okay, then we're going to move on to the candidate review by the Director of Public Safety. And and again, I covered this earlier, but the director has two options at this point. He can issue a conditional offer of employment and allow the candidate to continue in the process, or he does what's called as an A&A, appeared not appointed, and the candidate is removed from the civil service eligible list. In reaching this decision, the following documents are reviewed by the Office of the Director of Public Safety. The background investigative summary, the polygraph report, the candidate's credit history, criminal record, traffic record, the oral board report, including the ratings and recommendations of the board members, and the chain of command recommendations. Next, I prepare a summary of each candidate's history. After a thorough review of the aforementioned documents, we do this to ensure consistency. The following areas of each candidate's background history are addressed. Education, including degrees and certification, military service, employment history with attention to attendance, performance, and disciplinary actions, criminal history, including undetected criminal acts, and those are things that people haven't been arrested for, but they admit to on the polygraph or during the background phase of the investigation. That also includes thefts, illegal drug use, and other violations of law. The traffic history to include recent citations and admissions of DUI. And again, those would be admissions, not necessarily convictions. Financial history, and that would include credit debt and arrears are not being paid, accounts in active collection, civil judgments, tax liens and arrearages, and failure to pay taxes or file taxes. All this information is presented to the Director of Public Safety, and he renders the final decision on each candidate, conditional offer or A&A. The decision is final and there is no appeal. However, candidates are advised in the A&A notification sent by Civil Service that they may contact our office, and an explanation will be provided regarding the reasons for their removal. As Miranda mentioned, before we could send a formal letter of conditional offer, they do have to pass the Ohio Peace Officer Training Council pre-academy fitness test. And again, that consists of a 1.5 mile run, push-ups, sit-ups, and it must be successfully completed no more than 120 days from the start of the academy class. The passing benchmarks are set by OPANA and are standardized according to age and gender. The next phase is the supplemental personal history questionnaire and the polygraph. Since the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits specific questioning of candidates about their illegal use of drugs and alcohol prior to a conditional offer being extended, candidates who disclose illegal use of drugs or substances in the preliminary stages of the background investigation must complete an additional personal history questionnaire and take a second polygraph relative to their use of illegal drugs or substances. Okay, next I'm going to give you an example of a couple of the summaries that are presented to the director. Basically the candidate's name, where they are in the band, the rating of the reviewing commander, the rating of the reviewing deputy chief, then their oral board scores, the communication score, and the overall rating. Then you'll see second polygraph. In this case, there was some drug use, so he would have been required to take a second polygraph. He's a high school graduate. Then we get into the employment. Currently employed as a business credit specialist by Verizon Wireless since June 2006. His performance is rated highly by his supervisor with no attendance or disciplinary problems. He was terminated by an employer in 2003 due to attendance problems. He did receive good personal references. He has no criminal arrests or convictions, but between 1998 and 2012, he received 6 moving citations for speed, but nothing since 2012. He took a polygraph examination on June 6, 2017, and the polygraphs found him to be deceptive in the areas of theft, substance abuse, sexual activity, and child pornography. A second polygraph was administered on August 8, 2017. During this test, the applicant admitted to road rage incidents in which he was the aggressor, including one in 2002 in which he stated a black man cut him off, so he made a fist gesture which symbolized what he termed the noose thing, because the man was black. Further, the polygraphist stated that the applicant continued to exhibit significant reactions to questions about child pornography. All the oral board members rated him as unacceptable, citing his inability or unwillingness to provide forthright answers to questions. Both chain of command members rated him as unacceptable. And the director did not issue a conditional offer of employment, and the candidate was removed from the eligible list. The second example is another 80 band candidate. The commander, overall rating of 4, acting deputy chief 4. The oral board gave him a 3 in communication, a 3 overall. The candidate had not used drugs, so no second polygraph was required. This particular candidate was a high school graduate with a BS in geology from OSU. She's currently serving in the Army National Guard since 2014. Under comments, she's employed as a vehicle operator by the area bus service since October 2012, where her performance is rated satisfactory by her supervisor, no attendance or disciplinary problems. She was reprimanded for an accident involving a company vehicle. She received a very positive reference from her supervisor in the National Guard. She received good personal references, no criminal arrests or convictions, no moving sites or record. All the oral board members rated her as satisfactory. Both chain of command members rated her as effective, and there appear to be no current background areas of concern. And then finally, in 2017, we reviewed 154 candidates. 113 conditional offers of employment were granted. 41 candidates were A&A'd. And then I had the gender and race breakdowns for each area. And that's about it in a nutshell for us.
So we are prepared to open it up for questions and answers. And I'm actually going to start, with one. It was about the background check. And I think your comment was around social media. It's briefly looked at. And I was just thinking that in light of people being willing to almost put anything on their Facebook pages and everything else, you might really get to see who that person is if you delve into it through social media. So what did you mean by briefly?
So, ma'am, basically what I mean is we are not allowed to ask for their username or password. So all we do is we go to Google, we Google their name, Facebook or Instagram or what have you, and if they have not locked down their page in such a way in which we cannot see, then we're going to see what we see. But if they have, we just get the information that's open to any other public person that Googles their name. All right? Thanks.
Same question I had asked earlier. During the background investigation, do you ask anything specific? You already know where I'm going. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question that they answer is, are you now or have you ever been a member or associate of a criminal enterprise, street gang, or any other group that advocates violence against individuals because of their race, religion, political affiliation, ethnic origin, nationality, gender, sexual preference, or disability? And then additionally, it asks if has any member of your family ever been of that same line. And then it asks if you have any tattoos that signify membership in or affiliation with all of those things I just stated. And if they just marked yes to that statement about the tattoo, that is a prohibited tattoo and it must be removed no matter where it's at on your body.
Do you so that talks about groups and family, but with the example of the guy, the driving guy in the noose comment, do you ask them personally, not involved in a group, a formalized group, but as an individual, have you participated in any of these, whether it's a hate crime, I don't want to use crime because I want to stay away from the legal piece there, but engaged in hateful activity or bias activity, whether it's in this job or another job? Because I feel like there's a lot of racist people out there who don't go sign up and get a KKK card, they're just racist. How do you identify that?
So that's not a specific question that is asked within. Hate crimes are asked. And so when the questions are asked about crime, it's not have you been convicted of this crime, it's have you ever committed this crime. So as Mark was saying earlier, like a detected criminal act, if you've engaged in that activity, the answer, and it violates law, the answers to those questions are yes, and they're uncovered during the polygraph examination. Do they ask during the yes? There are questions that are asked during the polygraph examination too. So they might not be on paper that they're asked, but the polygrapher goes over this personal history statement as well as an entire set of what seems like hundreds of questions when you're taking the polygraph. So
it is specifically asked during the polygraph, and the last question from the polygraphist is, other than what you've told me, are you withholding any information about any of the subjects that we've discussed or something like that? So if they have withheld any information, it should show on their charts.
I don't want to get into anything here, but I guess the problem with that is if you're biased or if you're purposely being racist, you don't necessarily know that, and you're not going to consider that like, oh, am I withholding anything? No, because that's just part of the bad person that I am, and that's not going to be detected. But that answers my question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you have to know it's wrong or that you're doing something for it to pick up on the polygraph.
You had a question?
Yes, I do. And so I really want to dig a little bit more into this polygraph as a measure. And so polygraphs are not submissible as evidence or even recognized as science in the legal system. And it sounds like you're using the polygraph really heavily in your measure on the front end. And could some of you, and I don't know if you guys have that answer, why are we using that as such a measure that we're doing it once or twice or continuously bringing folks back when all the research says that you can't use a polygraph in court, that people have been proven to just be nervous? Why are we relying on polygraphs to get us to the places we're trying to go and identifying real quality candidates for our police force?
Yes, ma'am. That's why if you look at your removal standards, it is not an issue of removal. We cannot remove somebody due to them showing deception on a polygraph. To your question of why do we bring them back and give them a second polygraph or supplemental or specific issue, again, for the supplemental piece, if they admit to any drug use, they're going to have to do a supplemental polygraph. So that because before we extend them a conditional offer, we cannot ask about frequency. So that's why it's given again in the case of a supplemental polygraph. In the case of a specific issue polygraph, again, if they show deception, again, they're still going to go through the process, just as I believe one of the people that you showed an example for showed deception. So they're going to continue in the process, but yes, we are going to mention that they showed deception on the polygraph. But like you, everyone knows that it's not 100%, but it is one of our tools that we use in our vetting process.
I mean, sounds like, and maybe I'm not, sounds like if a person, you have some concerns about a candidate, your first go-to measure is to then administer a second polygraph. Or is it other things that you try to do, or is that then turned over to Director Pettis to figure out, or what's the next step? Or is it just going back to the polygraph, recognizing that the science is not real science?
I mean, first.
Again, you're just so close to each other. I couldn't hear your question at all, and neither could other members, so we need to really.
One more time. So all of us are able to look up polygraphs on your phone, and there's a lot of stuff online about it not being admissible in court. There's a whole lot of research around the fact that folks can be nervous, that they can just be sweating or whatever things going on in their life that allow them to appear to be deceptive in a polygraph test. And it sounds like in your presentation that as you begin to identify and screen out candidates, the first go-to is always to re-administer a polygraph test. My question is, are there other things other than the polygraph test that we're using as tools to identify great candidates for our police force? My second question is, why are we using a polygraph as such a big, heavy measure, and that's the way it appeared in your presentation, to screen and identify candidates?
So the other tools that we use, each stage of the process is a tool that we use to determine who the best applicant's going to be for a police officer. So polygraph is one tool that the division, civil service, and public safety use in order to decide who's going to be a good candidate and who's not. So that tool is used, and then, so say there is deception on some, I think one of the ones you said was theft. So what the background investigator will do is they have now received back all of the information from other outside local law enforcement agencies, state and federally. If this person's ever been named as a victim, as a suspect, or whatever, we have that information, so we can go over that information with the candidate and say, like, I see you were listed as a suspect here. Could this be one of the reasons why your polygraph charts showed deception? And sometimes people legitimately don't remember something. Sometimes they're trying to hide it. So the polygraph is just a tool along with the background investigation, all the record checks that we do, all the mailers that we do, the oral board phase, the chain of command review, and then the director's office review as well. And then Rick can talk to you and tell you a little bit about how the polygraph instruments work, because there is a science behind how polygraph instruments work, and we can provide you some information on that from our polygraphers. They've been doing it for 100 years combined, so they have a vast knowledge of that, and we can provide that science to you. But Rick can talk a little bit about the nervousness that you asked about and how the charts work with that.
Yes, ma'am. So one of your statements about you referenced about I can't remember, it was something that she just said. Okay, so about being nervous on the test, we account for that. Again, they're not hooked up immediately to the polygraph and strapped down. We sit down and we talk to them, or I don't, but the polygraphers sit down, they talk to them. They have a set of questions that they ask them, and they tell them the specific questions that they're going to be asked. So one, we realize you're nervous. You know, maybe you've never done this before. So they try to get them to relax and tell them that, you know, the exact questions they're going to be asked. So there's a test that we run prior to actually running, you know, the live test, where we tell them to lie. We like, you know, I may say, is there a light? Are the lights on in this room? I want you to answer no to this question, okay? So I know what it looks like when you lie, okay? We all know the lights are on in this room, but so I know what that's going to look like, okay? So that's how we account for that. As far as sweating, I mean, those are physiological reactions that you just have no control over. They do test perspiration, it tests your breathing, it tests your blood pressure. And so, I mean, so there's many different, it's not just like it's one reaction that we're testing in a polygraph. And I'm not defending polygraph, I agree with you. But I'm saying it's not that we hold so much weight in the polygraph, but again, it is a tool in the many tools that we use in this process. The first tool is we are issuing you or sending you a PHS, and we're asking you to be truthful on this PHS about your history. You know, criminal, military, employment, what have you. So, and then the last two being the oral board, you know. It is just a two. Again, it's not a removal. We're not going to exclude anybody just simply based on the polygraph. And then I remember what it was. You said something about giving them the test. Maybe they're nervous. Well, it's not like we only give them one test. If they show deception, we finish the test, and then we say, the polygraphist will say, well, what were you thinking about when I asked you about theft from an employer? And they'll say, well, you know, whatever they say, they give a response or whatever. And I'll say, well, you know, you were showing a little bit of deception. What were you thinking? Are you sure? What were you thinking about? So we give them opportunity to be truthful, if they don't recall anything, then they don't. Then we run the test again. And if it comes up deceptive again in that area, then that's when we report it. We may run it a third time. It just depends. If we'll ask them and then they'll give us a little bit more. If we run it again and it still shows deception, and we'll ask them again, well, what were you thinking about? Well, maybe I was thinking about this. And then so, they'll give a little bit of information. So then we'll run it again. Okay, so it's not like there's just a one shot at this. They're given several opportunities to be honest and truthful, or to disclose the information that they're showing deception on.
Okay, I have a question. In the beginning, you had a statement that said that you wanted a police department reflective of the community that you serve. However, in Columbus, there are a lot of minorities that are going to fall into that bad credit category, and that's going to eliminate, well, even with black males, it's eliminating them by 50%.
That wouldn't be an automatic removal. That's just one small thing. I've never seen the director remove anybody just based on credit history alone. That's just one small aspect of the.
That's a big thing. I mean, insurance companies rate you on it. Your credit history follows you, and it doesn't allow you to move forward. So my question is, if you don't owe taxes, because that's a question you can ask in the polygraph. You file your taxes, you don't owe back child support. Those questions you can clear up in that. To delve into family history, credit, you're potentially getting a job that's going to put you in a position where you can pay all of your bills. So I think that's kind of discriminatory in a lot of ways.
And again, I just point out that, the director is not going to remove somebody based on that alone. And, we're looking at, maybe accounts that are in collection that are just totally being ignored. Debt is still being incurred, that type of thing, indicating irresponsibility in that particular aspect of the background. Oftentimes, we see people that, have things in collection, but they've established payment plans and things like that, and that's totally going to sway the director's decision to, go ahead and approve that individual for a conditional offer, provided there aren't any other background issues.
You're right. You're absolutely right, and I do take that into consideration. And on more than one occasion, I've told Mark Gromlich a better job or a higher paying job would solve this problem. I do ask if the individual has established a payment plan for arrearage debt or what have you. So, but as he indicated, it's been very rare that I've not appointed someone purely because of credit or debt issues.
Yes. Excuse me. Look at me, because there are a couple of hands in here, and then you should.
Going to ask a similar question, so I'll follow up on that. When you make the recommendations, are there things that come up from the credit report that would be flagged for attention beyond that? And do you have any information on the demographics of those that the credit report raises in issue?
We don't have any specific numbers on, people that are adversely affected by that. But again, just to reiterate what Director Pettis says, that, that one issue alone is not going to get someone removed from the list. No. The other thing is, as far as financial history goes, the importance of it is, you know, it's an integrity issue too. You know, a police officer is going into homes, businesses, you know, they're coming into large amounts of cash. If they owe all these debts and collection accounts, then, you know, we don't want to put them in a position of where, you know, they may succumb to the temptation to take money to try and, you know, pay off accounts that may be in arrears. That's just one more.
What he's explaining there is if there's that large debt and if there's admission in the polygraph exam of theft, even though it's outside of civil service removal standards, and I have 20 other people I can select, I'll take that into consideration. I might choose you instead of someone that has that.
But we will say that on its surface, poor credit is not an indicator of criminal activity.
No, it's not.
I just want to make sure that I'm hearing that correctly, because even if I'm from an impoverished community or an underrepresented community and I have a poor credit score, I can be standing in front of a pile of gold and my integrity will not change because of it.
Absolutely not. But if you had admitted on a polygraph exam that you have committed theft, even though you haven't been convicted of a crime, I do get to take that into consideration.
Okay, that's a confluence of factors, and I agree with you there. Right. I just on its own though, right. I just wanted to make sure, because I was hearing it a bit differently, so I understand.
Any data kept on all the candidates who get an ANA that you could potentially review for demographic information?
That's what I have up here.
But I mean, the ultimate reason why they weren't chosen. So do we also, is it by category, or are we able to quantify how those match up with what the ultimate reason for dismissal?
That on a case-by-case basis, but we don't have any, you know, I mean, the reasons that the director may not give a conditional offer are so many and varied that there's just no practical way to track it. Well, that's the different situation. That's a removal under the civil service standard. This is all these people that the director has reviewed, they've already met the civil service standard. But yeah, so that's why they're.
Yeah, they've made it through.
They've already made it through. No.
So I think that is what we're missing here as a part of this story, because if you look at the numbers right here, and I'm a numbers person, okay? So if you have 118 white applicants and 29 of them receive an ANA, that's 24%, right? If you have 20 black applicants and 9 of those receive an ANA, that's 45%. So if you look at the ANA in terms of who is eliminated disproportionately, you see it has a negative impact on African American applicants. And so what's missing here in the data is the cumulative negative aspects that all of these factors have on people of color. And I think what would help all of us understand this a little bit better is if we have some reasoning or explanation in a chart form or something that it says, well, these applicants were removed 80% because of this, 20% because of this. And so that way we can understand this just a little bit better, because by the sheer numbers of it, you can clearly see that it is a disproportionate impact of on people of color.
We could go back to each of these individual summaries and give another presentation, and we could review each one of these. We could review each one of these candidates.
struggling in the city of Columbus in terms of diversifying the police department, and we've been saying this over and over and over that we want to make sure the department is reflective of the city's demographics, and here we can clearly see why it's not. And so that would help understand, okay, well, this is the issue, this is where we need to work on it. It can identify areas of improvement.
So I'm hearing very specific requests, and I need to know if that request can be honored. I mean, I realize some more work would have to be done coming back at another time to go through this, but is that a possibility?
Chair Jackson and members of the commission, we had an opportunity to talk during the break, and if it's okay with the commission, what we'd like to do is go back and put together a proposal to have a third party actually look at all this raw data. So take everything that we've just presented to you, provide it to a third party, ask them to report back to us what they're seeing here. And part of that conversation would be the feasibility of meeting this specific request. So if that's something that the commission would be open to, we'd like to be able to provide that report to you.
And just for the future, and I don't know who on the internal team reviews, I may have the oldest eyes sitting around this table, but I've had a very difficult time reading. I mean, from that. I mean, if that was an eye test, I would fail it today completely. And in the previous presentation, even what we have in our folders, when you put 3 slides on one page with the graphs, I couldn't understand the numbers at all. So I'm one that, and I would also, for something like this, I think it should be given to the commissioners. So this presentation maybe could be sent to us. But let's just make sure that you're looking at what's going to be given to us so we can really read it. Okay.
So how can an applicant who receives an ANA apply again? And at what time? And then the other question is just real quick. What, if any, access does the applicant have to their investigation? Or do they just get that specific thing that has disqualified them?
As I said in the presentation, when they get their notification of ANA from Civil Service, they are given my contact information, and I will provide them with the, the summary that was provided to the director. I also, advise them that they can make a public records request, and I recommend that they do it for the oral board statements, the background investigation, the polygraph. That way they can see exactly what resulted in their ultimate removal.
And then, yeah, so if you get A&A'd, you can reapply the following year. And we have many people who, there are some people like in the 80 band, for instance, last year we got through the entire 80 band. This year we will not get through the entire 80 band. The application periods are coming up, so Backgrounds with Civil Service will send a notification email to everyone who has not received a final offer of employment from the division saying, hey, the application period's open for July again. We strongly encourage you to apply again, because if for some reason you don't get called for backgrounds or we don't finish processing you, you have to like sit a year out kind of. So we do make those notifications ahead of time to encourage those individuals like in the 80 band or who are still in the process now to apply again so they don't miss out on a year cycle.
Yes.
Talk about the oral review board or the oral board, and that's a big component in also making recommendations for the applicant. And you talked about questions that are structured, standardized, and then questions about backgrounds. Do you have a process that validates those questions that they indeed are getting you the best you can get from that individual, what their skills are, or what the value of that information is in terms of their hiring and for the quality of the department?
We don't do a validation process such as the Civil Service Commission does on their tests, because these are interviews. So, I mean, the short answer is no, we don't have a validation report for those.
Two-part question. Director Pettis, you said, I think 41 of 50 officers in this recent class have college degrees. Can you just give me those numbers again?
Yes, 34 bachelor degrees and 7 associate degrees. Also add that there were 11 minorities and 9 white female. So that's 40% diversity, which is better than in the past. I believe the numbers I have here indicate 78.7, and this is through March 15th, 2018. That was provided to me. 78.7% of the division is male white. 8.1% is female white. 8.3% is male black, and 2.3% is female black, and then 2.8 Asian, Indian, other, and Hispanic. And that's the current makeup of the division. So to have 20% diversity or 22% minority in one class, we're doing better than we have in the past. The mayor has charged the Department of Public Safety with doubling diversity in both divisions of police and fire in the next 10 years, and to establish a strategic plan outlining how that would be accomplished. So we're working very diligently on that.
Thank you, sir. The second part of my question, or separate question, is, so you said the minimum age, or it was said earlier, the minimum age is 21. I don't know if you would speak to this or civil service would speak to this, but if that were recommended to be raised to 24, 25, 26, whatever, are there legal barriers, or is it a city's choice? Is it a charter? Where is that set? 'Cause for fire, 21, they can still go fight a fire. There's been studies that have shown that younger age officers with less experience get into, I don't want to say more trouble, but more trouble than older, more experienced officers. Where is that limit set?
The state of Ohio requires that peace officers be at least 21 years of age. But raising it higher, I can't. Those are set by civil service. So I can't speak to that. And the legal ramifications of that, I wouldn't be able to speak to either.
Who, and I'm sure somebody in the room can. So if we wanted to raise it, are there barriers, or is it, so I don't care as much about the minimum, I care about, are you limited to the minimum?
Yeah, to date, I think this is the first time we asked that the minimum be raised, so I don't know if we ever looked at that. What I can say is the state of Ohio does have a rule which we bypassed due to our charter that allows our candidates, our applicants, to be over 35 years of age at the time of application or at the time of appointment. A lot of agencies haven't bypassed that state law by having that within their charter to be able to do that. So we don't have a limit or a cap in terms of age, so we do get people at all ages through our process.
That's helpful.
Over 20 years of age, that is.
So the question that I'm asking, I'll throw out the hypothetical. Let's say we recommend you have to be at least 25 to be a police officer. I'm asking, is there a barrier to increase the minimum age, not the oldest age, 35 or 40 or whatever? Is there a legal barrier, a charter barrier? Is it a decision by the council? Is it a decision by the director, civil service?
Really, I just would want to see that validated. Like, what is the rationale for that, so that could hold up.
I would suggest let me ask our legal counsel, and I'll come back and we'll check on that.
Different viewpoint. I know that over the years, Director Pettis and I have had conversations when we were in different roles that sometimes by having that age of 21, it's an impediment for minorities to get there. If they're not in college, what do you do between the time you're 18 and 21? So that can cut sort of both ways, I think.
Oh, I agree. I wasn't making that recommendation. I was just looking for the legal.
I think that we have to work. I think that we have to take into consideration in the juvenile justice system, a juvenile is a juvenile from the age of 14 to 25. A young person's mind is not fully developed, research says, till they're 25. And I think that we have to be using research as we make these decisions. I worked for years for a juvenile organization. The juvenile justice system recognizes our juveniles up to 25. And that's because of developmental factors. So we need to be thinking about that when we're thinking about these decisions. I would hope that would be taken into consideration.
They can come and work for community crime patrol until they get hired. by the police department. That would be my recommendation.
There we go.
Do we have any other questions for our presenters? Yes.
So this one's going to be more for the civil service. I noticed in some of the materials you say you have additional time to take the test for English as a second language applicants. Is there any way that the scoring recommends or recognizes that they are competent and fluent in another language as a skill that could be useful to the force?
At this point, we don't have anything within our system regarding giving extra points or giving additional credit for people who have English as a second language or have two languages that they can speak fluently.
Any other questions? Well, then thank you for your presentations today. Thank you very much. So commissioners, before I move on to the one big takeaway, is there anything else you want to raise? No? Yes.
I have something worth raising it's a pet peeve of mine, but I've noticed 5 examples, 2 today and 3 in other meetings, of just the implicit bias, not of racism, but the Christian background that appears to be throughout the police department. So churches introducing themselves as Christians. I think we need to take that into consideration as we move forward. Instead of houses of worship, where we recruit, how we recruit, references on the board. Nothing specific, it's just something I've noticed that's been throughout presentations that shows a definite bias, although it's not necessarily the bias that we're looking at here. And I just wanted to put that out there for everyone's awareness.
So you wanted to say places of worship versus...
I mean, it should say places of worship or houses of worship, because when we're doing recruiting, people have introduced themselves as, I'm a Christian, we sit on the board of, we recruit at churches, there's been mention of, we go to churches. What about everybody else that's not being included in that group? And that's one of the small things that seems to be a theme so far.
Anything else? No? Then the one big takeaway. Oh, I'm sorry.
Chair, I just want to add, or my big takeaway is a lot of the things that have been shared today in regard to recruitment is interesting, and I think there's some things that have been raised that we need to dig a little deeper into and get more information. But my concern more so is around what happens once they become an officer, and I know there's some more sessions, and how are these things that are used so heavily on the front end to recruit being applied throughout their time as an officer is what I would like. That's what I'm taking away, because it seems like there's a lot of weeding out in the front end, but once these officers and these folks become officers in our community, how is this same rigor being applied to make sure that we have the best people on our streets? That's my biggest takeaway.
Rather than going around the table, I'll just let you volunteer. Show of hands. Biggest takeaway at this point. Yes.
I think the biggest takeaway is there's not something wrong. There's a lot of little. So as we go through this and we look at, there's not an issue we can fix that will fix everything we're here for. So as we go on, I've had a lot of questions I've written down, answers, issues, concerns. So when we have the opportunity, when the contractor or the consultant, thank you, is here, it's addressing those little issues that I think will solve a bigger problem. So that's my big takeaway. I'm excited to have that consultant here and actually discuss all of our smaller issues as they come along.
So my biggest takeaway kind of goes hand in hand with Matthew's, in that when the consultant comes, it's been restated over and over that we should reserve our questions about our more critical questions until the consultant arrives. But my hope is that these experts will be in the room when the consultant, or be available when the consultant comes, so that they can speak to the specifics of our questions at that time, because the consultant will have a cursory understanding of their role, but having access to the Civil Service Director, Mr. Furby, Commander Meter, Director Pettis, during that time to answer specifically from those individuals that both do the work and are able to drive change. So.
Any others? Tiffany?
The next minority recruiting meeting, for those who want to understand the process and maybe even meet the recruiters, because it's a whole new group of individuals, is next Tuesday at 1120 Morse Road. And we meet at 6:30. Right? So that's an opportunity to talk to them one-on-one.
I would say my biggest takeaway is our willingness to explore and engage honest conversation around those societal frames that are informed by institutionalized and systemic racism and classism, and what role they play into the exclusionary factors that could limit those that could potentially be good police for our community, particularly for the new American community that is growing in Columbus, as well as those that are traditionally underrepresented and marginalized.
Mine sort of goes hand in hand with his, and
Just move it towards you.
Yep. My biggest takeaway goes hand in hand with LaShawn's and that need to get better data on the officers that are applying in terms of their demographics. I wonder how departments of recruitment, diversity, inclusion can track the success of their efforts if they're not tracking that data and knowing, if we want our police force to represent our changing demographics of our community and speak the languages that our communities speak, we need to be able to have that data.
Just building a little bit upon the data, I think it's a positive recognition that we're hearing that you want to take a look formally with a third party to ensure that the data is looked at and it can be provided in a usable fashion to have a solid means of improvement using your own real-time data. I think that's positive.
I think one of my biggest takeaways, even thinking about how my own agency has kind of engaged with these issues, is, and I think it ties into what Matthew was saying, I think that very often there's a lot of little things that we do in policy or practice without really understanding the impact of it. And so some of my note-taking has been around little things that we've learned that have kind of tweaked a question of, well, what's the underlying cause for this? Or do we know what the impact of this decision-making is? And so I'm looking forward to being able to kind of dig into some of those issues, because I think that very often we operate so much in whatever our truth is that we don't realize what the impact of some of our decision-making is. And so I'm hopeful that we can come up with some self-reflection, like that we can give some tools that will help the department be able to do that.
Any others?
I just want to congratulate those Director Pettis and the I guess it could be like what Matthew's saying. It's not one big thing, but some little things that made a lot of difference between last year and this year. And there is improvement, and I think that that shows that there's hope to fixing this problem. And I'm in recruit training staff, and I shake the hand of every recruit that comes in the door, and it was a noticeable difference with this class, the 130th, that's about to start on Monday. There's a noticeable difference than the minorities. And so I just wanted to, my biggest takeaway is, Director Pettis, you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Well, for me, and I don't know if it's a takeaway, there's an appreciation for how we're moving forward. Again, I know sometimes it seems that we're being lectured at, but I am personally learning so much. For someone who was maybe somewhat connected to the justice system and the roles that I played, I mean, even the one today in terms of civil service, I kind of gotten, but the things this afternoon, and I think that will help us be better commissioners. It's still a lot to take in, and I know, but I think we're going about it the right way at this particular time. Anything else? Our next meeting, we just looked at this, yes?
I do have one more question. So when I was reading through the charter, and it says that 3 individuals are selected, and then they have a term limit to serve on the Civil Service Commission, how do we, or is it legally feasible to ensure that these things don't get rolled back under new leadership? That when progress is made relative to the way policing is done and public safety issues, that when new leadership comes, that these things are not repealed, especially when they pertain to something as serious as public safety.
Are you talking about the Civil Service Commission?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. I was reading the charter.
You did. And of course, the Civil Service Commissioners are appointed by the mayor.
That's correct.
Am I correct? I don't know if I've ever, I mean, I've lived in Columbus for a long time, if I've ever heard any issue about the commissioners and turning things back. I will tell you that more.
I don't mean the commissioner, I mean the policy, the way that. I'm sorry?
Are you talking about what's actually in the charter?
Yes, I'm talking about the charter.
Well, remember, the charter is
voted on.
So
Absolutely.
when it comes to police, I'll tell you one of the main ones that occurred, I think during the time that I was city attorney. Remember that there didn't used to be a term limit for fire chief or police chief. And so during that time period, it was changed. So for each of them, they can serve a maximum of 2 5-year terms. I mean, that was something, again, but it was voted on as other things have been voted on. And that's a slow, pretty deliberate process, I would say.
Absolutely. So then I guess as we move forward, another question about term limits, just kind of a segue. For individuals who work in high crime neighborhoods, police officers who then work year after year in areas where they then form their biases and then act on those biases that are attached to family names, certain communities, certain areas of town, and so on and so forth. And so taking an in-depth look at the impact that working in a high stress, high trauma area has on the perception of policing from the view of the officer.
It's actually really funny that you mentioned that, because I was just talking to one of my colleagues today, and we have started looking at police officer burnout. And that happens when they are in high crime, high trauma-induced neighborhoods, and how that then impacts how they do police. We actually just got licensed to actually get the survey to survey officers. So it'll be interesting to see the outcome of that, because data has shown that officers in other cities. So we're interested to see what comes out of that.
And I'm glad that you say that, because I know that intuitively from my experience in life and both engaging in my profession currently, and then you are able to provide data that supports that. So. And it's not something that's just relegated to me. This is feedback that I get from individuals that I engage with in the community as well. Like, the hood is rubbing off on this individual.
And I would just add to that, and this is I know we're going down another avenue, but trauma plays a huge part in all of this, and a huge role. And then the understanding, a real depth understanding of secondhand trauma and being exposed to it. And I have not yet, and maybe Chairman or some of you can answer, has that been looked at in a real, and I thank you for letting us know that you're looking at it, but I think to know that, has the department as a whole or the mayor's office or anyone looked at the effects of trauma up until this point, or are we going to just wait on a study to be done now?
So I got another thing, because Director Pettis actually just signed off on another study that I submitted to the Department of Justice to look at trauma-informed policing and trauma and how that impacts officers here in the city of Columbus.
And I'm gonna add to it, I would just also add that we connect, because y'all know me, that we connect that to the hiring process and all this background checking, because it goes back to my veteran question. We recognize our veterans are on the front line of trauma as in the military, and so to not use trauma as a gauge in any of our process along each checkpoint, I think that has to be a huge recommendation. Trauma has to come into this conversation at some point.
In our 8th meeting, tentatively scheduled under the use of force, and police-involved shootings, you will hear about our officer wellness programs. That will consist of the psychologist, our employee assistance program, our peer assistance team that's led by a commander, our chaplain program, and our industrial hygienist. So that is going to be a subject matter coming up in our 8th or 9th meeting.
I was just going to say, Tracy and I had talked during a break last meeting, and one of the things that she shared with me just about what an 8-hour shift looks like and the emotional ups and downs that happen during that, that was one of the questions I had, is what kind of compassion fatigue support and or training and assistance is available currently for officers, and then how is it that they can avail themselves of those services? Is it kind of like, hey, it's here if you need it, or what kind of emphasis is put on it? So
In great depth.
Yes.
If I could just comment that we've heard a lot of good information here and we've heard about takeaways, but I would like to remind you that we were brought here to tell you how we're currently doing things. But I'd also like to tell you, I was appointed safety director August 1st, 2016. The mayor and I had had discussions, and one area of that discussion revolved around how long do you do the same things over and over and see that they're not working and expect a different outcome. I specifically told the mayor that we've used advertising, marketing, and job fairs in recruitment for over 30 years. And diversity has continued to drop. In return, the mayor charged every director with trying new and innovative things, even if they don't work. And everything is on the table. And that's the reason that you are here, along with his comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy, which is very comprehensive. But he wanted to take a comprehensive, systematic, and very organized approach with input and recommendations from professionals as we move forward in making these improvements and changes. And that's part of what you will be doing, is making recommendations for us. But we do have some ideas, and we have made some recommendations. You haven't heard from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion yet, and Deputy Chief Quinlan. So we have some great ideas, but we haven't been able to implement them all yet. And we're very interested in the recommendations that we will receive from you.
First, let me just say thank you all for presenting. I know how hard it can be to lay out this type of content and engage in this type of dialogue, but it's important work, and I appreciate it. But Mr. Speaks, the question I have for you was, in absence of our ability to go on a ride-along, will we get an understanding of the day in the life of a police officer? What does it mean to clock in? What does it mean to work a full shift? What does it mean to go home? How do we get that perspective at any point during these presentations?
I guess we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
We'll add it.
Sure. And again, you all are more than welcome to go in the ride-alongs. It's just turn in the forms if you haven't already.
But I think this question adds a certain thing because of my role and what I do. I can't really do a ride along because to be seen riding in the police car kind of compromises my license to operate in certain circles. I mean, it's just that simple. And so,
I think if
how about going to another, go to Dayton and ride with them? They know me in Dayton, but I get your point. So, but I'll go. That's valid. That's valid. That's valid. Absolutely, that's a good idea. That's another
ideal for you, Olitha. Go, Dayton, here you come. But for those of us that have been truly traumatized by police, I think there has to be an alternative. And I continue to raise the fact that there's a different set of experiences when we're not in this pleasant space. And that has to be recognized. And so I don't know, I am traumatized often by police. And I'm trying to get past that as an individual here to bring my voice and the voice of my community. I don't feel comfortable. And I've raised this issue. I didn't feel comfortable in the beginning going to the police station for the meeting, but I'm here. And each time I get a little more comfortable, but I am not at a place, And I have to speak for a lot of other folks too. They are not at a place that they should even be, young black men should not even be exposed, from my perspective, to the ABCs of CPD, because that is traumatizing for young adults, especially young black males. And I've raised that issue for years now with Columbus Police Department about that program. I was there when Jeff Blackwell and Napoleon Bell started it. It's very traumatizing to reenact laying down on the ground and all that. So if we could get an idea of what it entails, Dr. Jones just shared with me her ride along just now, and I'm traumatized. Trauma is a real thing. And when you do frontline work with those at the highest risk, we operate in a space of trauma constantly. I don't need to see the ride along. I live in the community. I'm sorry, I don't live in it, but I work in that community. So I would hope that we could get a day in the life of, or some other alternatives to the ride along, so that we can get a better understanding, because I do recognize that these are members of our community, these police officers are, and that they have every right to go home, just like the people that I represent have every right to go home safe. So I am open to us figuring out what that could look like, but the ride along at this place, and we have to recognize where we are, not where we're hoping to be, in the fact that there is a disconnect there.
We maybe think about actually having officers, diverse officers, maybe of different ages, race, and gender, to come in and to share with us. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to think, how do we get there if we don't go on the ride along, but to literally
Levon Moorfield, and some other officers will simulate that.
We'll talk about the part of it, yes.
Homicide, there was a chase, somebody jumped out of their cuffs, there was a home invasion. I was traumatized after that ride along, so it is a very interesting experience.
With no aftercare.
None, I just went home.
Day in the life of the community, no aftercare.
We've been talking about how we get at some of these things, and one thing that we want to be very responsive to and sensitive to is getting the voice of communities that are impacted by policing, and a variety of communities in the city. And I'm not saying in a negative way, just simply what are their experiences, share those experiences with us. So we've kicked around the idea of having an officer roundtable. We're really just listening to them talk about their experience, and then do Q&A, and then also do a series of community roundtables like that, where we have folks come in, share their experience with policing, and then we can do Q&A with them as well.
If I may, I just came back from Los Angeles about 3 weeks ago, and they run their gang reduction and youth development program there that has been very successful. I remember Nickerson Gardens and Jordan Downs from the time that I was a child, and how they would have 100 homicides a year in some of these projects. And they got to have gotten them down to 1 in the last 3 years. They've made some significant strides. One of the things that was noteworthy is that they actually go into the community in mass, not just one community liaison officer, but go and have a whole group of officers who are devoted to building those relationships. Not that now it's a different officer who will come and actually arrest you, but the guy or the man or woman who engages in the community has regular conversations, comes out, something we've been trying to do at the Urban League. We're going to have Saturday the kickball game between police and fire. And so having those personal interactions, I believe, is going to go a long way to reducing much of the trauma. Now, will it happen overnight? But that's something that is progressive that they're doing in LA, and I think that is necessary here, because asking a 25-year-old or an 18-year-old who's been kicked in the head when he was cuffed on the ground, or had some other adverse reaction, or with an officer, to come to a round table and recount that, it's never going to happen. And those are the individuals who we really want to hear from, because they're the individuals that are most active. That's the guy that's going to jump out of his cuffs. That's the guy that's going to do a home invasion 9 out of 10 times. So getting their perspective, being able to go into that community and have those conversations, is going to be something I believe is going to be useful, if we are willing to consider it.
I think if we have the conversations as a commission not going to be in uniform, minus the police presence, you're going to get a more open and honest dialogue. When there's a police presence, you aren't going to get the person that just broke into the house down the street last week. They're not going to come. But other individuals, if they know it's just regular people, they're trying to find out a better way to build these relationships or make these interactions a little bit less violent. As Tammy keeps speaking of in the Linden area, then they don't want to see the police at all. They just want to get their voices out and get what's going on off their chest.
Absolutely. So what I'm saying is really to those communities, having a conversation in Amberley Square, having a conversation inside of Marsh Run, where we can really invite those guys in, those women in, having a conversation in the terrace, as opposed to, having it at a church somewhere, to Matthew's point, where you don't get any of the Somalian population. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
As we've been talking about trauma, I know trauma-informed care is really a buzzword these days, but I do think it's important that maybe the commission should have a good understanding of what that means to be trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. Plug for myself, I'm certified trainer in trauma-responsive care, so I'm certainly happy to provide a training for the commission if that's something that people would be interested in, and having a better understanding of what it means to be trauma-responsive.
Anything else? Well, I'd say another, again, very informative, very interactive meeting. We were talking about the next date is June 27th. From 2 to 6. Location to be determined. Am I correct? Okay. Yes. Okay, okay. And I would encourage everyone to try to get here maybe 5 minutes before the meeting time. I know things come up, but we lose a little bit of time because I try to wait until the vast majority of the commissioners are here. So we have to go back and do things. But again, thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Have a very pleasant evening.
You do.
And please tell me to stop raining.